Dennis Howard's eyes widen as the four-armed Nigerian Masseuse's touch becomes unmistakably intimate. He is about to experience an alien massage with an unexpected ending. The 35-year-old human diplomat lies on a plush table in Zygora's premier massage parlor, his body tense from the grueling interstellar journey to Nige. Earth Command's stern instructions echo in his mind. Secure favorable trade terms, no matter the cost. But as Uma's iridescent blue hands work their magic, those concerns fade into the background. Dennis inhales deeply, taking in the sweet aroma of Nigerian incense. The parlor's dim lighting casts a soft glow on Uma's striking features. Her movements are fluid, almost hypnotic, as she kneads his muscles with practiced precision. "Relax, Ambassador Howard." Uma purrs, her voice like silk. "Let me ease your worries." Her touch grows bolder, venturing into territory far beyond professional boundaries. Dennis's breath catches in his throat. He knows he should object, but the sensation is too intoxicating to resist. As the massage progresses, Dennis loses himself in the moment. Uma's hands explore his body with increasing fervor, and he finds himself responding in kind. The line between diplomacy and desire blurs, culminating in an intense, passionate encounter. In the aftermath, reality crashes back. Dennis's eyes dart to the clock on the wall. "Damn it!" he exclaims, leaping from the table. He's late for the negotiations. Hastily donning his rumpled suit, Dennis races through Zygora's bustling streets. The city's towering spires and floating platforms blur past as he sprints towards the negotiation chamber. He bursts through the doors, disheveled and out of breath. Ambassador Zorn, the Nigerian delegation leader, fixes him with a cold stare. "So kind of you to join us, Ambassador Howard," Zorn says, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Dennis mumbles an apology and takes his seat. As the negotiations begin, he struggles to focus. Uma's touch lingers on his skin, her image burned into his mind. The Nigerian delegates exchange knowing glances as Dennis fumbles through his talking points. Hours pass in a haze. Dennis nods along, agreeing to terms without fully comprehending their implications. By the time the session ends, he's inadvertently committed Earth to a series of unfavorable trade agreements. Exiting the chamber, Dennis's communicator buzzes. A message from Earth Command flashes across the screen. "Explain yourself immediately. Unacceptable performance." Panic sets in as Dennis realizes the magnitude of his mistake. He must find a way to salvage the deal and his career. But unbeknownst to him, in a secure Nigerian facility across the city, Uma delivers her report. The human diplomat took the bait, she informs her superiors. We now have leverage for future negotiations. As Dennis grapples with the consequences of his actions, the stage is set for a complex dance of interstellar diplomacy, where personal indiscretions and political machinations intertwine. The fate of Earth-Nige relations hangs in the balance, all because of one unexpectedly intimate alien massage. Dennis slumped against the wall of his temporary quarters in Zygora, his head throbbing. The gravity of his actions during the negotiations greatly troubled on him. Earth Command's message burned in his mind, a constant reminder of his failure. He ran his hands through his disheveled hair, replaying the events that led to this disaster. Uma's touch, the intoxicating alien massage, the rush to the negotiation chamber. It all seemed like a hazy dream now. But the consequences were all too real. Dennis stood up abruptly, persistence etched on his face. He couldn't let this stand. He needed answers, and there was only one place to get them. The streets of Zygora bustled with activity as Dennis made his way back to the massage parlor. Nigerian hover vehicles zipped overhead, their soft hum a stark contrast to the chaotic thoughts swirling in his mind. As he approached the entrance, Dennis hesitated for a moment, his hand hovering over the door panel. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside. The familiar sweet scent of Nigerian incense washed over him, But instead of the calming effect it had before, it now set his nerves on edge. His eyes darted around the dimly lit interior, searching for Uma. "Can I help you, Ambassador Howard?" a gruff voice asked. Dennis turned to face a stern-looking Nigerian male behind the reception desk. His forearms were crossed, creating an imposing barrier. "I'm looking for Uma," Dennis said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Is she here?" The Nigerian's expression hardened. "I am Klex, the manager of this establishment. Uma has taken an unexpected leave of absence. I'm afraid she's not available." Dennis's eyes narrowed. "That's quite a coincidence, don't you think? When did she leave?" Klex's upper set of arms twitched slightly. "I'm not at liberty to discuss our employees' personal matters, Ambassador. Now, if there's nothing else." Frustration bubbled up inside Dennis. He opened his mouth to press further, but something in Klex's posture made him reconsider. The manager was hiding something. That much was clear. "Thank you for your time," Dennis said curtly, turning to leave. As he stepped back onto the street, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He casually glanced over his shoulder, catching sight of a group of Nigerian security officers trying to blend into the crowd. Their eyes were fixed on him. Dennis's heart raced. He was being followed. Without breaking his stride, he veered into a bustling market area. The cacophony of alien voices and the riot of colors from exotic wares provided the perfect cover. Dennis weaved through the throng, ducking under awnings and slipping between stalls. He rounded a corner, nearly colliding with a hooded figure. As he mumbled an apology, a familiar voice froze him in place. "Dennis," Uma whispered, her iridescent blue skin barely visible beneath her cloak. Before he could react, Uma grabbed his arm and pulled him into a narrow alley, away from prying eyes. Dennis's mind reeled, a mix of anger, confusion, and lingering attraction battling for dominance. "What's going on, Uma?" he hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Uma's eyes darted nervously to the alley's entrance. "I'm sorry, Dennis. I never meant to. It's complicated." "Then uncomplicated," Dennis demanded. Uma took a deep breath. "I'm part of a rebel faction. We oppose the government's isolationist policies. We want closer ties with Earth and other civilizations." Dennis stared at her, dumbfounded. "So, what? Seducing me was part of some grand plan?" Uma nodded, her expression a mix of guilt and dedication. "We needed to sabotage the negotiations, create tension to force both sides to reconsider their approach." Dennis's mind raced, piecing together the implications. "Who's behind this? Who are you working for?" "Our leader is a Nigerian named Vrax," Uma explained. "He believes in a future where our species can work together openly without the constraints of our current government." As Dennis processed this information, Uma's communicator chirped urgently. Her eyes widened as she read the message. "It's Vrax," she said, her voice tight with worry. "Ambassador Zorn has uncovered our plot. They're coming for us." Dennis's training kicked in, his mind already calculating potential scenarios. "What's your plan?" Uma looked at him, hope flickering in her eyes. "Come with me, Dennis. Help me reach Vrax. You could learn so much about our culture, maybe even find a way to salvage the diplomatic situation." Dennis hesitated, the weight of his decision pressing down on him. If he helped Uma, Earth Command would view it as treason. But if he turned her in, he might lose the only chance to understand the complex political landscape of Nige. The sound of approaching footsteps made the decision for him. "Let's go," Dennis said, grabbing Uma's hand. They slipped out of the alley, blending into the market crowd. Dennis led them through a series of checkpoints, his diplomatic credentials and quick thinking getting them past the increasing security presence. As they reached the outskirts of Zygora, Uma spotted an unattended hover vehicle. With a quick glance around, she hot-wired the alien craft its engine humming to life. "Get in," she urged Dennis. As he climbed aboard, Dennis caught sight of the glittering spires of Zygora behind them. The familiar skyline rapidly shrank as Uma piloted the craft into the alien wilderness. The landscape before them was unlike anything Dennis had ever seen. Purple forests stretched to the horizon, their canopies shimmering in the fading light. Crystalline rock formations jutted from the ground, refracting the setting sun in dazzling arrays of color. Uma's expert piloting kept them low, using the terrain to avoid detection. As night fell, she guided the craft into a hidden cave, its mouth barely wide enough to admit them. Inside, the cave opened up into a spacious cavern. Bioluminescent fungi clung to the walls, casting an ethereal blue glow throughout the space. Uma set the craft down gently, powering it off. "We should be safe here for the night," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the cavern. Dennis nodded, the events of the day finally catching up with him. He slumped against the cave wall, exhaustion seeping into his bones. Uma sat beside him, her presence both comforting and unsettling. In the soft blue light, her alien features seemed even more striking. "I know you have questions," she said softly. Dennis turned to face her, their eyes meeting in the dim light. "Tell me everything," he said. As Uma began to speak, sharing the intricacies of Nigerian politics and culture, Dennis found himself drawn in. The night deepened around them, but neither noticed, too engrossed in their conversation. In the quiet of the alien night, surrounded by the gentle glow of the fungi, Dennis felt a shift in his perception. The lines between duty and desire, between Earth and Nige, began to blur. As exhaustion finally overtook them, Dennis and Uma drifted off to sleep, their bodies unconsciously drawing closer in the cool cavern air. The gentle beeping of Dennis's communicator roused him from his slumber. Blinking away the remnants of sleep, he checked the device. His heart sank as he read the encrypted message from Earth Command. Time was running out. They had 24 hours to reach Vrax and unravel the truth behind the Nigerian political web. As Uma stirred beside him, Dennis steeled himself for the challenges that lay ahead. The fate of two worlds now rested in their hands. The first rays of Nige's alien sun crept into the cavern, signaling the start of a new day and the continuation of their perilous journey. Dennis checked his communicator once more, the urgency of Earth Command's message spurring him into action. "Uma, we need to move," he said, gently shaking her awake. Uma's iridescent eyes fluttered open, quickly focusing as she remembered their situation. "How much time do we have?" "Less than a day," Dennis replied, helping her to her feet. "We need to reach Vrax before Zorn's forces do." They quickly gathered their meager supplies and made their way back to the stolen hover vehicle. Uma's expert touch brought the alien craft humming to life, and they shot out of the cave into the breathtaking Nigerian landscape. The purple forest stretched endlessly before them, their shimmering canopies casting ever-changing shadows on the ground below. Dennis marveled at the alien beauty, even as his mind raced with the gravity of their mission. Suddenly, Uma yanked the controls, bringing the hover vehicle to an abrupt halt. "Gorax!" she hissed, pointing ahead. Dennis's eyes widened as he took in the massive creature blocking their path. It resembled a colossal, six-legged rhinoceros, its iridescent scales catching the morning light. The Gorax pawed at the ground, its multiple eyes fixed on their vehicle with clear aggression. "What do we do?" Dennis asked, his voice tight with tension. Uma's hands tightened on the controls. "These beasts are fiercely territorial. We can't go around without losing precious time." Dennis's mind raced, drawing on his diplomatic training in alien wildlife. "I have an idea," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "Drive straight at it." Uma turned to him, her expression a mix of disbelief and curiosity. "Are you mad?" "Trust me," Dennis insisted. "When we're almost on it, swerve hard to the right. The Gorax won't be able to change direction quickly enough. Uma nodded, her mind focused. She gunned the engine, sending the hover vehicle hurtling toward the Gorax. The beast lowered its head, ready to charge. As they closed the gap, Dennis's heart pounded in his chest. "Now!" he shouted. Uma wrenched the controls, and the hover vehicle veered sharply to the right. The Gorax, caught off guard, tried to pivot, but its massive bulk worked against it. It stumbled, letting out a frustrated roar as Dennis and Uma sped past. Their victory was short-lived, however. A harsh grinding sound emanated from the hover vehicle's engine, and the craft began to lose altitude. "The sun maneuver must have damaged something," Uma said, fighting with the controls. "We're going down." They managed a rough landing in a small clearing, the hover vehicle's engine sputtering out as they touched down. Uma quickly assessed the damage, her expression grim. "It's beyond my ability to repair here," she admitted. "We'll have to continue on foot." As they set out into the dense purple forest, Dennis immediately felt the strain of Nige's higher gravity. Each step required more effort than he was used to, and the alien atmosphere left him slightly short of breath. Uma noticed his struggle and offered her arm for support. "The Nigean environment can be harsh for off-worlders," she said. "Here, let me show you something." She led him to a nearby tree with peculiar blue leaves. Plucking one, she squeezed it, releasing a clear liquid. "This will help you adjust to our atmosphere," she explained, offering it to Dennis. He hesitated for a moment before accepting, trusting in Uma's knowledge. As he swallowed the liquid, he felt a cooling sensation spread through his body, making breathing easier. They pushed on through the alien forest, Uma expertly identifying safe water sources and edible plants. Dennis found himself increasingly reliant on her knowledge and skills, a fact that both humbled and intrigued him. As the Nigean sun reached its zenith, they stumbled upon a clearing housing an abandoned outpost. The facility's sleek architecture contrasted sharply with the wild growth around it. Its doors left ajar as if its occupants had left in a hurry. "Let's check it out," Dennis suggested. "There might be supplies we can use." They cautiously entered the outpost, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. Signs of a recent struggle were evident: overturned furniture, scorch marks on the walls. In a back room, they hit the jackpot. A cache of advanced Nigean communication devices lay scattered across a workbench. Uma's eyes widened as she examined them. "These are military grade," she whispered. "What were they doing here?" Before Dennis could respond, Uma had already set to work activating one of the devices. After a few tense moments, it crackled to life, filling the room with static. Suddenly, a voice cut through the white noise, Ambassador Zorn's unmistakable gravelly tones. "Converge on these coordinates. Vrax and his rebels must be captured at all costs. Move out immediately." Dennis and Uma exchanged alarmed glances. "We're running out of time," Dennis said. Uma nodded, her fingers flying over the device's controls. "I've got Vrax's location," she announced, "but it's deep in the Crystal Canyons. It's a treacherous area, Dennis." "We don't have a choice," Dennis replied, his determination evident in his voice. "We have to warn Vrax before Zorn's forces get to him." They set out once more, their pace quickened by the urgency of their mission. As they approached the Crystal Canyons, Dennis gasped at the sight. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground, their facets refracting the sunlight into dazzling rainbows. But beauty came with danger. The edges of these crystals looked sharp enough to slice through the toughest materials. Uma's fatigue became increasingly apparent as they carefully picked their way through the treacherous terrain. Despite her alien physiology being better adapted to Nide's environment, the stress of their journey was taking its toll. Dennis found himself supporting Uma, helping her across particularly difficult stretches. The role reversal wasn't lost on him, deepening his appreciation for his alien companion. As they navigated a particularly narrow path between two towering crystal formations, the air around them began to crackle with energy. Uma looked up, her expression one of alarm. "Electrical storm," she said, her voice tight with worry. "We need to find shelter now." They barely made it to a small cave in the crystal face before the storm hit in full force. Lightning arced between the crystal formations, creating a deadly but mesmerizing light show. Pressed close together in the confines of their shelter, Dennis and Uma found comfort in each other's presence. As the storm raged outside, they gave in to the growing attraction between them, their passionate encounter a stark contrast to the danger that surrounded them. When the storm finally passed, they emerged to find the landscape transformed. Many of the crystal formations had shattered, revealing a hidden path that seemed to lead directly towards Vrax's coordinates. As they followed this new route, a glint of metal in the sky caught Dennis's eye. He reacted instinctively, pulling Uma behind a large crystal formation just as a Nigean patrol ship soared overhead. "That was too close," Uma whispered, her body tense against his. They pressed on with renewed urgency, the close call serving as a stark reminder of the dangers they faced. As the alien sun began to set, casting long shadows across the crystal-strewn landscape, they finally reached the outskirts of the rebel base. Their relief was short-lived. In the fading light, they could see Ambassador Zorn's forces surrounding the hideout, preparing for an imminent attack. Dennis turned to Uma, his expression grim but determined. "We need a plan," he said quietly. "And fast." Uma nodded, her eyes scanning the enemy forces, looking for any weakness they could exploit. As night fell over the crystal canyons, Dennis and Uma huddled together, formulating a desperate plan to warn Vrax and save the rebel movement. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, with time quickly running out. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, with time quickly running short. Dennis surveyed the enemy forces, his mind racing. "We need to find a way to warn Vrax," he whispered to Uma. Uma's eyes scanned the perimeter, her tactical training kicking in. "There," she pointed to a section of the crystalline terrain that seemed less guarded. "That's our best chance. The formation of the crystals creates a blind spot in their defenses." Dennis nodded, trusting her expertise. They moved silently, using the towering crystal formations as cover. The sharp edges of the crystals threatened to slice through their clothing, but they pressed on, driven by urgency. As they approached the rebel base, two guards materialized from behind a crystal, weapons raised. Dennis tensed, but Uma stepped forward, her voice low and steady. "Shattered light reveals hidden truths," she said. The guards immediately lowered their weapons. "You're with the resistance," one of them said, relief evident in his voice. Quickly inside, they were ushered into the base, a massive cavern hidden within the crystal formations. Dennis marveled at the sophistication of the rebel hideout. Advanced technology hummed all around them, far beyond anything he'd seen in the capital. A tall, imposing Nigean male approached them, his deep purple skin almost iridescent in the cavern's light. His silver eyes fixed on Dennis and Uma with piercing intensity. "I am Vrax," he said, his voice resonating with authority. "What news do you bring?" Dennis stepped forward. "Ambassador Zorn's forces are preparing to attack. They're right outside, planning an imminent assault." Vrax's expression hardened. He turned to a nearby console, issuing rapid commands. The cavern erupted into a flurry of activity as rebels mobilized, preparing for the impending attack. "There's more you need to know," Vrax said, turning back to Dennis and Uma. "Zorn and his allies have been hoarding advanced weapons technology, including devices capable of destroying entire planets. We fear they may use this against other species, including humans." Dennis felt the weight of this revelation settle on his shoulders. The implications for Earth-Nigean relations were staggering. He opened his mouth to respond, but a deafening alarm cut him off. The cavern shook as explosions rocked the outer defenses. Vrax's voice rose above the chaos. Uma, get the human to the communication center. He needs to contact his people. Uma grabbed Dennis's arm, pulling him through the chaotic base. They rounded a corner and found themselves face to face with a group of Zorn's elite soldiers who had breached the perimeter. Uma sprang into action, her forearms a blur as she engaged the intruders in hand-to-hand combat. Dennis, acting on instinct, managed to wrestle a weapon from one of the soldiers. He fumbled with the alien device for a moment before figuring out how to activate it, using it to stun another attacker. As the last soldier fell, Dennis noticed Uma clutching one of her arms, purple blood seeping between her fingers. He quickly scanned the area, spotting a medical station nearby. "Here, let me help," he said, guiding her to the station. Using the unfamiliar medical supplies, he cleaned and dressed the wound as best he could. Their eyes met, and Dennis felt a surge of emotion that transcended their alien differences. They reached the communication center, and Dennis immediately set to work attempting to contact Earth Command. His fingers flew over the alien console, but frustration quickly set in. "It's no use," he said, banging his head on the panel. "Zorn's implemented a planet-wide communications blackout. We're cut off." Uma's expression grew grim. "Then it's up to us to stop this." Vrax burst into the room, his silver eyes wide with urgency. "Our outer defenses have fallen. Zorn's forces are advancing rapidly." He fixed Dennis and Uma with an intense gaze. "You have a choice to make. Stay and fight with us, or escape through our emergency tunnels to a shuttle." Before they could respond, a massive explosion rocked the base. The cavern ceiling partially collapsed, debris raining down around them. When the dust settled, Dennis and Uma found themselves cut off from Vrax, trapped in the communication center. Dennis's eyes darted around the room, searching for a way out. He spotted an air vent near the ceiling, just large enough for them to squeeze through. "There," he pointed. "We can escape through the ventilation system." As they prepared to enter the vent, Uma hesitated. Dennis could see the conflict in her eyes, torn between her duty to the rebel cause and her feelings for him. "Whatever we decide," Dennis said softly, taking her hand, "we'll face it together." With that assurance, they entered the vent, embarking on a perilous journey through the base's innards. The tight space and Nige's higher gravity made progress difficult, especially with Uma's injury. They navigated treacherous drops and narrow passages as explosions continued to shake the facility around them. As they neared what seemed to be an exit, voices drifted up from below. Dennis and Uma paused, listening intently. "The ambassador has brought the prototype," one voice said. "He intends to test it on the rebel base." "But, sir," another voice responded, "the collateral damage to the surrounding area would be catastrophic." Dennis and Uma exchanged alarmed glances. The situation had just become even more dire. Not only were the rebels in danger, but Zorn's weapon threatened to devastate the entire region. They quickened their pace, knowing that time was running out. As they reached the end of the ventilation shaft, Dennis pushed against the grate, feeling it give way. Fresh air rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of battle. Dennis emerged first, helping Uma out of the vent. They found themselves on a ledge overlooking the crystal canyons, the rebel base behind them engulfed in chaos. In the distance, they could see Zorn's forces advancing, with a massive device at the center of their formation. "That must be the weapon," Uma said, her voice tight with fear. Dennis scanned the area, his mind racing. They had to find a way to stop Zorn and warn the rebels about the true nature of the threat they faced. But with communications blocked and enemy forces closing in, their options were limited. "We need to get closer," Dennis said, his eyes fixed on the approaching army. "If we can disrupt that weapon somehow, we might be able to buy enough time for the rebels to regroup." Uma nodded, her expression a mix of persistence and uncertainty. "It's risky, but you're right. It's our only chance." As they prepare to descend from their perch and make their way toward Zorn's forces, a high-pitched whine filled the air. The massive weapon began to glow ominously, its power building. Dennis and Uma exchanged a look of unwavering tenacity. They had to act now, or it might be too late for everyone. Everyone. The fate of two worlds hung in the balance, with time quickly running short. As Dennis and Uma prepared to descend from their perch, a high-pitched whine pierced the air. The massive weapon began to glow ominously, its power building to catastrophic levels. They exchanged a look of unwavering tenacity, knowing they had to act immediately. Suddenly, the ledge beneath them crumbled, sending them tumbling down a steep incline. They rolled and slid through a maze of crystal formations, the sharp edges tearing at their clothes. Dennis reached out, grabbing Uma's hand as they careened towards an opening in the crystal face. They landed hard on a metal floor, the impact knocking the wind out of them. As they caught their breath, Dennis and Uma found themselves in a dimly lit storage area. Rows of sleek, unfamiliar devices lined the walls, and in the center of the room stood a massive contraption that could only be the planet-destroying weapon they'd overheard mentioned earlier. "We're in Zorn's secret arsenal," Uma whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the advanced technology surrounding them. Dennis nodded, his diplomatic training kicking in as he grasped the gravity of their discovery. "We have to stop them from using that weapon," he said, his voice low and urgent. Uma approached the central device, her forearms moving with practiced precision as she examined its control systems. Her brow furrowed as she manipulated the holographic interface. "Dennis," she called, her voice tight with concern, "there's a fatal flaw in the design. If they activate this, it won't just destroy the rebel base. It could take out a significant portion of the planet." Dennis joined her at the control panel, his mind racing. "We need to warn both sides," he said. "This goes beyond the conflict between Zorn and the rebels. The entire planet is at risk." Before they could formulate a plan, the sound of approaching footsteps echoed through the room. Dennis and Uma exchanged a panicked glance before diving behind a stack of crates. Pressed close together in the confined space, Dennis could feel the rapid beating of Uma's heart, her alien physiology a stark reminder of the stakes they faced. Ambassador Zorn strode into the room, flanked by his personal guard. His imperious voice filled the space as he approached the weapon. "Prepare the activation sequence," he commanded, his fingers dancing across the holographic interface. Dennis felt Uma tense beside him. He knew they had to act fast. Taking a deep breath, he made a split-second decision. "Stay hidden," he whispered to Uma. "I'm going to try something." Before she could protest, Dennis stepped out from behind the crates, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "Ambassador Zorn," he called, his voice steady despite the pounding of his heart. Zorn whirled around, his eyes narrowing as he recognized Dennis. "The human," he snarled. "How did you get in here?" Dennis took a step forward, his diplomatic training taking over. "Ambassador, I need to speak with you about the weapon. There's something you need to know." Zorn's hand hovered over the activation panel, his expression a mix of suspicion and curiosity. And what could a human possibly know about our advanced technology? Dennis chose his words carefully, aware of the delicate balance he needed to strike. "I have reason to believe there's a flaw in the design," he said, watching Zorn's reaction closely. Activating it could have catastrophic consequences for Nige itself. Zorn's eyes widened slightly, his hand moving away from the panel. "Explain yourself," he demanded, taking a step towards Dennis. As Dennis engaged Zorn in conversation, he noticed movement in his peripheral vision. Uma was using the distraction to silently neutralize Zorn's guards, her forearms allowing her to move with incredible stealth and efficiency. Dennis maneuvered himself between Zorn and the weapons control panel, appealing to the ambassador's ego. "Surely a leader of your stature wouldn't risk Nige standing in the galactic community with such a destructive act," he said, his tone carefully modulated to sound respectful yet challenging. Zorn's expression darkened. "You know nothing of Nige's place in the galaxy," he spat. "We must protect ourselves from outside influences, including your meddling human race." As Zorn launched into a tirade about his isolationist policies, Dennis caught Uma's eye. She had successfully disabled the guards and was now working on the weapons control panel, her forearms moving in perfect coordination as she sabotaged the device. Suddenly, a piercing alarm blared through the facility. Uma had triggered a security protocol while disabling the weapon. Zorn's eyes blazed with fury as he realized he'd been deceived. With a roar of anger, he lunged at Dennis. Dennis braced himself, using his human strength to grapple with the larger Nigean. They crashed into a rack of prototype weapons, sending devices clattering to the floor. Dennis managed to land a solid punch, but Zorn's alien physiology made him a formidable opponent. Just as Zorn gained the upper hand, Uma joined the fray, her forearms wrapped around the ambassador, pulling him off Dennis. Together, they managed to subdue Zorn, using restraints found among the stored weapons to secure him. Breathing heavily, Dennis and Uma shared a look of relief. "We did it," Uma said, a smile spreading across her face. Dennis nodded, but his expression remained serious. "We're not done yet," he said, moving towards the communication console. "We need to get the truth out there." Working together, they accessed the facility's communication system. Dennis composed a message revealing the weapon's fatal flaw and calling for an immediate ceasefire, while Uma used her technical skills to override the communication blackout. As they broadcast their message to both rebel forces and Zorn's troops, the sounds of battle outside began to fade. Dennis and Uma stood side by side, watching as their words scrolled across the screen, potentially changing the course of the conflict. In the sudden quiet, Dennis turned to Uma. The intensity of their shared experience, the danger they'd faced together, and the chemistry that had been building between them culminated in a moment of raw emotion. Without a word, they came together in a passionate embrace, their alien physiologies intertwining in a kiss that transcended their differences. Their moment of triumph was short-lived. The facility's main door burst open with a thunderous crash. Dennis and Uma broke apart, turning to face a squad of heavily armed Nigean soldiers pouring into the room. As the troops surrounded them, weapons raised, Dennis and Uma exchanged a determined look. Whatever came next, they would face it together. With their hands raised in surrender, Dennis's mind raced, trying to determine if these soldiers were loyal to Zorn or the rebels. The leader of the squad stepped forward, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. The tension in the room was palpable as Dennis and Uma stood frozen, unsure of their fate. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from behind the squad. Vrax strode forward, his presence immediately changing the atmosphere. The soldiers lowered their weapons, and Dennis felt a wave of relief wash over him. "Well done, you two," Vrax said, his voice filled with admiration. "Your actions here have turned the tide of this conflict." Dennis and Uma exchanged glances, their surprise evident. Vrax quickly explained that these were rebel forces who had successfully taken control of the facility, thanks in part to the confusion caused by their broadcast. As the immediate danger subsided, Vrax escorted Dennis and Uma to a secure briefing room within the captured facility. The room was a stark contrast to the chaos they had just left behind, with holographic displays showing real-time updates of the planet-wide situation. Vrax's expression grew serious as he began to explain the current state of affairs. "We've gained the upper hand, but pockets of resistance loyal to Ambassador Zorn still remain throughout the planet. We need your help to bring this conflict to a peaceful resolution." Dennis straightened, his diplomatic instincts kicking in. "What do you need from us?" "Your skills as a negotiator could be invaluable in brokering peace talks with the remaining pro-Zorn factions," Vrax replied, turning to Dennis. "And Uma, your technical expertise and knowledge of Zorn's operations will be crucial in dismantling any remaining weapons caches." Uma nodded, her forearms crossed in tenacity. I'm ready to do whatever it takes to protect my people. Over the next few days, Dennis and Uma threw themselves into their new roles. Dennis found himself in intense negotiations with Zorn loyalists, using every diplomatic trick he had learned to bring them to the table. Uma, meanwhile, led teams to locate and disarm hidden weapons caches scattered across Nigerian territory. Their work was not without danger. During a particularly tense negotiation session, Dennis noticed a subtle movement in his peripheral vision. Before he could react, Uma's hand shot out, deflecting a projectile aimed at his head. The would-be assassin, a Zorn loyalist who had infiltrated the talks, was quickly subdued. As they retreated to their shared quarters that evening, the adrenaline from the close call still pumping through their veins, Dennis turned to Uma. "You saved my life back there," he said softly. Uma's alien features softened as she met his gaze. "We're partners now, Dennis, in more ways than one." Their lips met in a passionate kiss, their alien physiologies intertwining in a way that sent shivers down Dennis's spine. As they broke apart, breathless, Dennis knew that their bond had deepened into something more than just a professional partnership. The next morning, as they prepared for another day of negotiations and weapons disposal, Dennis received an urgent message from Earth Command. His superiors, having finally broken through the communication blackout, demanded an immediate explanation for his actions and threatened to recall him. Dennis felt a moment of hesitation as he read the message, but one look at Uma steeled his dedication. He sent a brief reply, explaining the situation and respectfully declining to abandon his mission on Nige. He knew he might face consequences for his defiance, but the peace process had become too important to him to walk away now. As they worked tirelessly to bring stability to Nige, Uma opened up to Dennis about her past. She revealed that she had once been a high-ranking scientist in Zorn's government, responsible for developing some of the very weapons they were now dismantling. The discovery of the true nature of the weapons program had led her to join the rebels, a decision that had cost her everything. "My family," Uma said, her voice barely above a whisper, "they're still out there somewhere. I haven't seen them since I defected. I don't even know if they're safe." Dennis took her hand, marveling at how natural it felt despite their physiological differences. "We'll find them, Uma. I promise." Their moment of intimacy was interrupted by an urgent call from Vrax. A group of hardline Zorn supporters had seized control of a major Nigerian city, threatening to use leftover weapons against civilian populations. Dennis and Uma were tasked with leading a covert operation to infiltrate the city and neutralize the threat. As they prepared for the dangerous mission, Dennis and Uma shared a quiet moment in their quarters. The weight of what they were about to attempt hung heavy in the air. "Uma," Dennis began, his voice thick with emotion, "I need you to know Dash." Uma placed a finger on his lips, silencing him. "I know, Dennis. I feel it too." Their alien bodies came together once more, each touch and caress a silent promise of what they hoped would come after this mission. As they lay intertwined, Dennis marveled at how something that should have felt so foreign instead felt like coming home. Under the cover of darkness, Dennis and Uma made their way into the occupied city. Disguised as Nigerian civilians, they navigated through checkpoints using a combination of Dennis's smooth talking and Uma's technical skills to bypass security systems. As they approached the weapons cache, resistance intensified. In a narrow alley, they found themselves cornered by a squad of Zorn loyalists. Uma sprang into action, her forearms becoming a blur as she engaged multiple opponents at once. Dennis, drawing on the Nigerian fighting techniques Uma had taught him, managed to hold his own against two attackers. Together, they subdued the squad without raising an alarm, but both knew their luck wouldn't hold forever. They raced towards a weapons cache, aware that time was running out. When they finally reached their objective, the sight that greeted them made their blood run cold. The weapons had been modified, their destructive potential amplified far beyond their original design. Uma's eyes widened as she assessed the situation. "This is worse than we thought," she said, her voice tight with concern. "Disarming these will require both of us working in perfect sync." As they began the delicate process of disarming the first weapon, alarms blared throughout the city. Their presence had been discovered, and Zorn's forces were closing in. Dennis met Uma's gaze, seeing his own persistence reflected in her alien eyes. They had come too far to fail now. With the sound of approaching forces growing louder, they turned back to their task, their newly forged bond about to face its ultimate test. With sweat beading on their foreheads, Dennis and Uma focused intently on the complex circuitry before them. The modified weapons loomed ominously, their destructive potential far beyond anything they had anticipated. Suddenly, the ground shook with a thunderous explosion. Alarms blared throughout the facility as the sound of gunfire erupted outside. Dennis and Uma exchanged a quick glance, realizing that the rebel forces had launched their assault on the Zorn loyalist stronghold. "This might be our chance," Dennis said, his voice barely audible over the chaos. "The fighting should keep them distracted." Uma nodded, her forearms moving with increased urgency. "We need to work faster. Every second counts now." As the battle raged outside, Dennis and Uma fell into a seamless rhythm. Their earlier intimacy translated into an uncanny ability to anticipate each other's needs. Uma's multiple limbs danced across the weapon's intricate components, while Dennis provided steady support, following her lead without hesitation. "Flux capacitor to your left," Uma instructed, her voice calm despite the pressure. Dennis's hand was already there, ready to make the adjustment. Time seemed to blur as they worked tirelessly, the sounds of combat providing a chaotic backdrop to their focused efforts. One by one, the weapon's destructive capabilities were neutralized, their potential for devastation rendered inert. As Uma disabled the final weapon, Dennis kept watch at the door. The fighting was drawing closer, and he knew their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. "Done," Uma announced, stepping back from the last device. "They're all neutralized." Before Dennis could respond, the door burst open. A squad of Zorn's elite guards poured into the room, their weapons trained on the pair. "Hands up," the lead guard barked. "You're under arrest for treason against Ambassador Zorn." Dennis and Uma raised their hands slowly, their minds racing for a way out. Uma's eyes darted around the room, assessing their options. In a split second, she made a decision. With a burst of strength, Uma lunged for a nearby piece of heavy equipment. Her forearms wrapped around it, muscles straining as she lifted the massive object. With a grunt of effort, she toppled it over, creating a makeshift barricade between them and the guards. "Dennis, the maintenance hatch," Uma shouted, pointing to a small opening in the far wall. As the guards scrambled to circumvent the obstacle, Dennis and Uma sprinted for the hatch. Dennis wrenched it open, the metal groaning in protest. Uma pushed him through before following, her live form barely squeezing into the narrow opening. They found themselves in a dark, winding tunnel that snaked beneath the city. The air was damp and musty, filled with the echoes of distant fighting above. "Where do these tunnels lead?" Dennis asked, his voice hushed as they moved swiftly through the darkness. "They connect most of the major buildings in the city," Uma explained, leading the way. "We use them for maintenance and emergency evacuations. If we're lucky, we can use them to get out of the combat zone." As they navigated the labyrinthine passages, Dennis couldn't help but marvel at how naturally they moved together. Even in the near-total darkness, they anticipated each other's movements, their bodies in perfect sync. Suddenly, Uma froze, her hand shooting out to stop Dennis. Voices echoed from a junction ahead, speaking in hushed Nigean. Uma's eyes widened in recognition. "Those are civilians," she whispered. "They must be hiding from the fighting." Cautiously, They approached the intersection. As they rounded the corner, they found themselves face to face with a group of frightened Nigeans. The civilians recoiled at first, but then one of them stepped forward, her features eerily familiar. "Uma?" the Nigerian woman gasped, her voice a mix of shock and disbelief. Uma's forearms dropped to her sides, her entire body rigid with surprise. "Kira, is that really you?" Dennis looked between the two, noting the similarities in their features. "Uma, who is this?" Uma's voice was barely above a whisper as she replied, "My sister." The sisters stared at each other, years of separation and conflicting loyalties hanging between them like a physical barrier. Kira had sided with Zorn's government when Uma joined the rebels, a choice that had torn their family apart. "What are you doing here?" Kira asked, her tone guarded. Uma gestured to Dennis. "We're trying to stop this conflict, to save our people from Zorn's misguided plans." Kira's expression softened slightly. Perhaps we were wrong about Zorn's intentions." She hesitated, then added, "I have information that might help you." As Kira began to explain Zorn's contingency plans and the location of his secret bunker, Dennis's mind raced with the possibilities. A plan began to form, a daring strategy that could potentially end the conflict once and for all. "We need to infiltrate that bunker," Dennis declared, his diplomatic training kicking into high gear. "If we can capture Zorn, we might be able to bring his loyalists to the negotiating table." Uma nodded in agreement, her earlier hesitation replaced by grit. "I'm with you, Dennis. We've come too far to back down now." Kira, her face a mixture of fear and commitment, stepped forward. "I can guide you through the city's hidden passages. It's the least I can do to make amends." As the unlikely trio prepared to set out on their perilous mission, Dennis caught Uma's eye. In that silent exchange, they reaffirmed their commitment to each other, to Nige, and to the hope of a peaceful resolution. With Kira's knowledge, Uma's skills, and Dennis's diplomacy, they had a chance to end this conflict and forge a new future for Earth-Nigean relations. Together, they stepped into the tunnel, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their quest to reach Ambassador Zorn's hidden bunker. As they navigated the winding passages, guided by Kira's insider knowledge, the tension in the air was palpable. The sounds of distant fighting echoed through the tunnels, a constant reminder of the high stakes of their mission. Suddenly, Kira held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "We're here," she whispered, pointing to a reinforced door ahead. "This is the final barrier between us and Zorn's command center." Dennis and Uma shared a determined look. They had come too far to falter now. With a nod, Uma stepped forward, her forearms working in tandem to bypass the door's security system. The lock disengaged with a soft click, and the door slid open. The trio burst into the room, ready for a confrontation, but the scene before them was unexpected. Ambassador Zorn stood at the far end of the command center, his hand hovering over a control panel. His eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed with perseverance. "You're too late," Zorn snarled, slamming his hand down on the panel. A section of the wall behind him slid open, revealing a sleek escape pod. Before Dennis, Uma, or Kira could react, Zorn leaped into the pod. The hatch sealed shut, and with a deafening roar, the pod shot into a concealed tunnel. "No!" Uma cried out, her voice filled with frustration. Dennis, however, was already in motion. His eyes scanned the room, quickly assessing their options. He spotted a control panel near, where Zorn had been standing. "Uma, can you access this?" he asked, gesturing to the console. Uma rushed over, her fingers flying across the alien interface. "It's a tracking system," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "I can see the trajectory of Zorn's escape pod." As Uma worked, Kira stepped forward, her face pale. "I know where he's going," she said softly. "There's a secret base on Nige's second moon. It was Zorn's contingency plan if things went wrong here." Dennis's mind raced, formulating a plan. We need to follow him. If we can capture Zorn, we might be able to end this conflict once and for all. Kira nodded, a look of willpower crossing her face. There's a prototype interplanetary shuttle in a hangar nearby. It's our best chance of catching up to him. Without wasting another moment, the trio sprinted out of the command center. They encountered pockets of resistance as they made their way to the hangar, but their combined skills proved more than a match for Zorn's remaining loyalists. As they entered the hangar, Dennis's breath caught in his throat. The shuttle was unlike anything he had ever seen, a sleek, silver vessel that seemed to embody the best of both human and Nigean technology. Uma took charge immediately, her forearms allowing her to operate the complex controls with ease. "I'll pilot," she said, settling into the cockpit. "Dennis, I need you on navigation. Kira, take the defense systems." As they strapped themselves in, the enormity of what they were about to attempt hit Dennis. They were about to leave Nige's atmosphere in pursuit of a rogue ambassador, with the fate of two worlds hanging in the balance. The shuttle's engines roared to life, and Uma guided it out of the hangar with expert precision. As they shot into the sky, the battle-scarred landscape of Nige fell away beneath them. Their ascent was far from smooth. Automated defense satellites, likely activated by Zorn, began firing upon them as soon as they breached the upper atmosphere. "Incoming!" Kira shouted, her hands dancing across the defense console. She managed to deflect several energy blasts, but the shuttle shuddered under the impact of a near miss. Uma's piloting skills were put to the ultimate test as she wove through the barrage of attacks and debris. Dennis watched in awe as her forearms worked in perfect harmony, adjusting their course and speed with incredible precision. "We're approaching Nige's second moon," Dennis announced, his eyes fixed on the navigation display. "I'm detecting a massive energy signature on the surface." Uma's eyes widened in recognition. "That energy pattern. It matches the planet-destroying weapon we disabled earlier." The implications hit them all at once. Zorn had a backup weapon, and he was planning to use it as leverage to regain control of Nige. As they approached the moon's surface, Dennis could see a sprawling facility nestled in a crater. Uma brought the shuttle down a short distance away, using the moon's rugged terrain for cover. "We need to move fast," Dennis said as they disembarked. "Every second counts." The trio made their way towards the facility, their movements hampered by the moon's low gravity. As they approached the main entrance, Dennis held up a hand, signaling them to stop. "We can't just barge in," he said, his diplomatic training kicking in. "We need a plan." Uma nodded in agreement. "I can bypass their security systems, but we'll need to be careful. Who knows what kind of defenses Zorn has in place?" As they huddled together, formulating their strategy, Dennis couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come. A human diplomat, a Nigean rebel, and a former government loyalist, now united in their mission to save both their worlds. With a shared look of perseverance, they moved towards the facility's entrance, ready to confront whatever challenges lay ahead in their final showdown with Ambassador Zorn. Zorn. The name hung in the air as they approached the facility's entrance, a reminder of the formidable opponent they were about to face. Uma's fingers danced across the security panel, bypassing the complex encryption with practiced ease. The door slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Dennis took point, his body tense and ready for action. Kira followed close behind, her eyes darting nervously from side to side. As they crept deeper into the facility, the distant hum of machinery grew louder. Suddenly, alarms blared to life, bathing the corridor in pulsating red light. "We've been detected," Uma shouted over the din. No sooner had the words left her mouth than a group of armed guards rounded the corner ahead. Dennis reacted instantly, tackling Uma and Kira to the ground as energy bolts sizzled overhead. "This way," Kira called out, gesturing towards a side passage. They scrambled to their feet and ran, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing behind them. Uma's four arms worked in tandem, sealing doors behind them to slow their pursuers. As they rounded a corner, they found themselves in a vast chamber dominated by a massive piece of machinery. At its center stood Ambassador Zorn, his hand hovering over a control panel. "You're too late," Zorn sneered, his finger descending towards a large red button. Time seemed to slow as Dennis launched himself across the room, his body colliding with Zorn's just as the ambassador's finger made contact with the button. They tumbled to the ground in a tangle of limbs, grappling for control. Uma sprang into action, her forearms a blur as she attacked the weapon's control systems. Kira, meanwhile, raced towards a separate console, her fingers flying over the controls as she attempted to stabilize the rapidly overloading power core. The room shook violently, panels exploding in showers of sparks. Dennis and Zorn continued their struggle, rolling dangerously close to exposed circuitry. Suddenly, Zorn's hand emerged from beneath his robes, clutching a sleek Nigean energy pistol. Dennis barely had time to react as Zorn squeezed the trigger. A bolt of searing energy grazed his arm, leaving a painful burn in its wake. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Dennis channeled the fighting techniques Uma had taught him. With a swift move, he knocked the weapon from Zorn's grasp, sending it skittering across the floor. "Uma," Dennis called out, pinning Zorn to the ground. "How's it coming?" "Almost there," Uma replied, her voice strained with concentration. "The weapon's offline, but Zorn's initiated a data transfer. I'm trying to trace it now." Kira's voice cut through the chaos. "The power core is critical. I can't shut it down completely, but I've managed to contain the meltdown. We need to evacuate immediately." Dennis hauled Zorn to his feet, keeping a firm grip on the ambassador's arms. "You heard her. We're leaving. Now." They made their way through the crumbling facility, dodging falling debris and malfunctioning equipment. Uma used her strength to clear their path, tossing aside twisted metal and shattered concrete. Dennis supported Kira, who had been injured during her efforts to stabilize the power core. As they approached the hangar, they found their way blocked by a massive sealed door. Uma and Kira immediately set to work on the security panel, their fingers flying over the alien interface. Come on," Dennis muttered, glancing nervously at the increasingly unstable structure around them. With a triumphant beep, the hangar doors slid open. They rushed inside, Uma taking the pilot seat of their shuttle, while Dennis secured the captured Zorn. The engines roared to life as Uma guided the craft out of the hangar. The moon's surface fell away beneath them, the secret base growing smaller in the viewport. Suddenly, a massive explosion rocked the shuttle, debris from the disintegrating facility pelting their hull. Uma's exceptional piloting skills were put to the test as she wove through the field of debris, narrowly avoiding collision with massive chunks of the moon base. The shuttle's engines strained under the stress of their rapid acceleration, fighting to break free from the moon's gravitational pull. As they cleared the debris field, the group let out a collective sigh of relief. Dennis turned his attention to tending his own wound and helping Kira with her injuries, while Uma set a course back to Nige. The captured ambassador Zorn sat in sullen silence, his plans in ruins. As they approached Nige, the shuttle's communication system crackled to life. Vrax's voice filled the cockpit, informing them that news of Zorn's defeat had spread across the planet. The remaining loyalist forces were surrendering, and a cautious sense of celebration was taking hold. However, the group's relief was tempered by the knowledge of the transmitted weapon schematics. As they began their descent into Nige's atmosphere, Dennis and Uma exchanged a meaningful look. They had won this battle, but a new challenge loomed on the horizon, one that could threaten not just Nige, but Earth and the entire galactic community. The shuttle entered Nige's atmosphere, streaking across the sky like a meteor. As they approached the capital city, Dennis could see crowds gathering in the streets below. Their return marked not just the end of a conflict, but the beginning of a new era in Earth-Nigean relations. Uma guided the shuttle towards a central government complex, where a landing pad had been hastily cleared for their arrival. As the engines powered down and the hatch opened, Dennis took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. The immediate danger had passed, but the real work of rebuilding trust and forging a lasting peace was just beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. Rebuilding trust, forging peace, and confronting the new threat that loomed on the horizon. As the shuttle touched down on the landing pad, Dennis could see a contingent of rebel forces waiting for them. The moment the hatch opened, they were whisked away, led through a series of winding corridors to a secure facility deep within the government complex. Uma kept a firm grip on Zorn as they moved, her 4 arms ensuring the defeated ambassador had no chance of escape. Kira limped alongside Dennis, her face a mixture of pain and dedication. They were ushered into a large, dimly lit room where Vrax and other rebel leaders awaited them. The air was thick with tension as Dennis began to recount the events that had transpired on the moon base. "The weapon's been destroyed," Dennis said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "But we have a bigger problem. Zorn managed to transmit the weapon schematics before we could stop him." A collective gasp filled the room. Vrax's eyes narrowed, his tentacles writhing with agitation. "To whom?" he demanded. Dennis shook his head. "We don't know. That's why we need to act fast." Vrax nodded, his expression grim. "You're right. This threat extends beyond Nige. It could affect Earth and the entire galactic community." He turned to address the room. "I'm forming a task force to track down the recipient of this data. Dennis, Uma, I want you to lead it." Dennis felt a surge of adrenaline cut through his fatigue. He glanced at Uma, who nodded in agreement. "Kira," Vrax continued, "your actions have proven your loyalty. I'm assigning you to the team as a technical advisor." As the meeting continued, outlining the resources at their disposal, including advanced tracking technology and a specialized spacecraft, Dennis felt his communicator vibrate. He excused himself and stepped into a nearby alcove to answer. The stern face of his superior at Earth Command filled the small screen. "Diplomat Reed, you are ordered to return to Earth immediately for a full debriefing and potential disciplinary action. Your involvement in the Nigean conflict has raised serious concerns." Dennis felt his heart sink. He looked back at the room where Uma and the others were still deep in discussion. In that moment, he made his decision. "I'm sorry, sir, but I can't comply with that order," Dennis said, his voice steady. "The situation here is too critical. I'm recording a full message explaining my actions and the current threat. Earth needs to understand what's at stake." He ended the transmission before his superior could respond and rejoined the group. Uma sensed his unease and shot him a questioning look. Dennis shook his head slightly, silently promising to explain later. As the meeting concluded, Vrax pulled Dennis aside. "The planet is in turmoil. News of Zorn's defeat has spread, but so has unrest. We need a unifying voice. Before you leave on your mission, I need you to address the Nigean people." Dennis nodded, understanding the weight of the request. He spent the next few hours crafting his speech, drawing on every ounce of his diplomatic training. Standing before the broadcast array, Dennis took a deep breath. Uma stood just off camera, offering a reassuring smile. As the red light blinked on, Dennis began to speak. "People of Nige, I come to you not as an outsider, but as someone who has fought alongside you, who has seen the strength and resilience of your world. We stand at a crossroads." His words, translated and broadcast across the planet, spoke of unity, of the shared struggles and hopes that bound all Nigeans together. He emphasized the need for cooperation in the face of new challenges, urging former loyalists and rebels alike to set aside their differences for the greater good. As he finished, Dennis could hear the distant sound of cheering from outside the building. Uma approached him, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was incredible," she said softly. With the immediate political situation stabilized, Dennis and Uma turned their focus to the upcoming mission. The next few days were a blur of intensive training, familiarizing themselves with the advanced spacecraft and honing their combat skills. During brief respites from training, Dennis and Uma found moments of intimacy. Their alien physiologies created unique sensations as they explored each other, deepening their bond in ways neither had anticipated. On the eve of their departure, Dennis and Uma lay entwined in each other's arms, their bodies still humming from their passionate encounter. "I chose to stay," Dennis said quietly, finally explaining his earlier communication. "Earth ordered me back, but I couldn't leave. Not with so much at stake. Not without seeing this through. With you." Uma's lower arms tightened around him as her upper hands cradled his face. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling him in for a tender kiss. As dawn broke, the task force assembled at the launch site. Dennis and Uma boarded their sleek spacecraft, followed by Kira and a small team of Nigerian specialists. The engines hummed to life, and Dennis felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation as they lifted off, leaving Nige behind. As the ship entered hyperspace, Dennis gazed out at the streaking stars. Uma joined him, their hands intertwining. "Ready for our next adventure?" she asked, a hint of mischief in her voice. Dennis grinned, pushing aside his concerns about Earth's reaction to his defiance. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he knew they would face them together. Little did they know that far behind them, in a Nigerian prison, events were unfolding that would add yet another layer of complexity to their already perilous mission. Little did they know that far behind them, in a Nigerian prison, events were unfolding that would add yet another layer of complexity to their already perilous situation. As their spacecraft entered the frontier star system, Dennis and Uma exchanged a knowing glance. They had prepared for this moment, but the tension in the air was palpable. With a series of practice movements, Uma activated the advanced cloaking technology, rendering their ship virtually invisible to local sensors. "Cloaking engaged," Uma reported, her forehands dancing across the control panels. "We should be undetectable to both authorities and any unsavory elements in the area." Dennis nodded, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Good. Let's use that asteroid field for additional cover, while we scan for any traces of the weapon data." Kira, seated at the sensor station, began the intricate process of searching for the encrypted signature they had associated with Zorn's data transfer. The ship weaved through the dense field of space rocks, Uma's piloting skills on full display as she navigated the treacherous terrain. Suddenly, Kira's console lit up. "I've got something," a faint energy signature matching the encryption pattern. "It's coming from that moon." She pointed to a small, barren satellite orbiting a massive gas giant. As they approached, the moon's surface came into sharp focus. Its cratered landscape seemed devoid of life, but appearances could be deceiving. "I'm detecting a hidden outpost," Kira reported. "It's well concealed, but our sensors are picking up subtle power fluctuations." Dennis stood, his decision made. "Uma, you're with me. We'll lead a small team to investigate. Kira, you have command of the ship. Keep her cloaked and be ready for a quick extraction if needed." Within minutes, Dennis and Uma, along with 2 Nigerian specialists, were suited up in protective gear designed to withstand the moon's harsh environment. As they stepped out onto the lunar surface, Dennis felt the extreme temperature fluctuations even through his suit. Uma took point, her extra limbs providing enhanced stability on the uneven terrain. As they approached the outpost's entrance, she suddenly held up a hand, signaling the team to halt. "Automated defense system," she whispered through the comm. "Give me a moment." With lightning-fast reflexes, Uma sprang into action. Her forearms moved in perfect synchronization, manipulating tools and interfacing with the alien technology. In a matter of seconds, the defense system powered down, its lights fading to darkness. "Impressive," Dennis murmured, admiration clear in his voice. Inside the outpost, they found evidence of a hasty departure. Workstations were still active, displays flickering with partial data streams. Uma and the specialists immediately set to work, downloading and analyzing whatever information they could salvage. Dennis moved through the abandoned base, his trained eyes searching for clues. In a side room, he discovered a star chart projected on a wall. One system was highlighted, pulsing with a faint red glow. "I think I've found our next destination," he called out. Uma joined him, her eyes widening as she took in the chart. "That's an unclaimed space beyond the frontier. Whoever took the data, they're trying to stay off the grid." As they prepared to leave, Uma's sharp eyes caught a discrepancy in the outpost layout. "Wait," she said, running her hands along a seemingly blank wall. With a soft click, a hidden compartment slid open, revealing a cache of advanced technology. "This is Nigean," Uma said, her voice filled with surprise. "But these components, I've never seen anything like them before." Before they could investigate further, alarms blared throughout the outpost. Kira's voice crackled over their comms, urgent and strained. "Unknown vessel approaching fast. You need to get back here now." The team sprinted back to their ship, energy weapons fire erupting around them as they crossed the lunar surface. Uma's extra arms proved invaluable, allowing her to return fire while still maintaining her breakneck pace. They barely made it into the airlock before Kira executed a series of dizzying maneuvers, using the moon's gravity to slingshot them away from their pursuer. As they broke free from the moon's orbit, their attacker came into view. "What is that?" Dennis breathed, staring at the alien vessel. Its design was unlike anything he had ever encountered, all sharp angles and pulsing energy fields. Uma shook her head, equally baffled. "Not Nigean, not human. We're dealing with an unknown player here." The alien ship opened fire, forcing Kira into a series of evasive maneuvers that strained their vessel to its limits. Uma took control of the weapon systems, her forearms allowing her to target multiple points simultaneously. A well-placed shot disabled the alien ship's main propulsion, giving them the opening they needed. However, as they prepared to jump to hyperspace, warning lights flashed across the control panel. "Hyperdrive's damaged," Kira reported, her voice tight with stress. "We can't make the jump." Dennis scanned the nearby systems, looking for options. There, he pointed to a planet glowing a soft blue on their navigation display. "Breathable atmosphere. We can make emergency repairs there." As they set course for the planet, Dennis's communication panel lit up with an incoming transmission. To his surprise, it was a coded message from Earth Command. "What is it?" Uma asked, noting the expression on his face. Dennis read the message twice to be sure. "It's from my superiors. Despite my earlier insubordination, they're offering support. They've given us coordinates for a secret human outpost in the system. We can seek refuge there." As they entered the planet's atmosphere, the lush, jungle landscape came into view. Dense foliage stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by winding rivers and the occasional clearing. They set the ship down in a small glade, immediately setting to work on repairs. Dennis organized a scouting party to secure the perimeter, venturing into the humid, alien forest. The jungle pulsed with life around them, strange bird-like creatures calling in the canopy above. As they pushed through a particularly dense patch of vegetation, Dennis found himself face to face with a startling sight. Humanoid figures stood before them, their skin glowing with a soft, bioluminescent light. Their eyes, large and expressive, regarded the newcomers with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Dennis raised his hand slowly, showing he was unarmed. Drawing on his diplomatic training, he attempted to establish peaceful contact. "We mean you no harm," he said softly, using gentle gestures to convey his meaning. One of the beings stepped forward, mimicking Dennis's gestures. It tilted its head, as if trying to understand. Slowly, a look of comprehension seemed to dawn on its face. "Lumina," it said, pointing to itself and its companions. "We, Lumina." Dennis nodded, a smile spreading across his face. "Lumina," he repeated. "We are friends. We need help." The Lumina conferred among themselves, their skin pulsing with varying patterns of light. Finally, the leader turned back to Dennis and nodded, gesturing for them to follow. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Dennis couldn't shake the feeling that their troubles were just the beginning. The weapon data was still out there, and now they had both Zorn's loyalists and an unknown alien race to contend with. But for now, they had found a moment of respite in the strange, glowing jungle. Dennis only hoped it would be enough to prepare them for the challenges that lay ahead. But for now, they had found a moment of respite in the strange, glowing jungle. As Dennis and his team followed the Lumina deeper into the bioluminescent forest, the ethereal light cast dancing shadows on the verdant foliage. The air hummed with an alien energy, tingling against their skin. Uma's four arms brushed against low-hanging vines, sending ripples of light cascading through the plants. The Lumina led them to a vast network of caverns, their walls pulsing with soft, multicolored light. Dennis marveled at the natural beauty of this hidden world, but his mind never strayed far from their mission. As they settled into a large chamber, the team began to strategize their next move. Uma's fingers danced across a holographic display, analyzing the data they had recovered from the abandoned outpost. Kira pored over star charts, trying to pinpoint the location of the unknown ship that had attacked them. The air was thick with tension and purpose. A rustling from the cavern entrance caught their attention. Dennis's hand instinctively went to his weapon, but he relaxed as he saw the Lumina's leader gesturing calmly. From the shadows emerged a figure that was decidedly not Lumina. The newcomer was human, his rugged features and well-worn clothing marking him as someone accustomed to life on the fringes of civilized space. He carried himself with the easy confidence of a man who had faced danger and lived to tell the tale. "Name's Jax," he said, his voice gruff but not unfriendly. "Earth Command sent me to lend a hand." Dennis raised an eyebrow, his diplomatic training kicking in as he assessed this unexpected arrival. "Earth Command? I was under the impression they weren't exactly pleased with our independent actions." Jax chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tumbler. "Let's just say your recent exploits have caught their attention. They figure if they can't stop you, they might as well help." As Jax integrated himself into their group, he shared vital intelligence that shed new light on their situation. The unknown ship they had encountered wasn't so unknown after all. "You've stumbled into something bigger than you realize," Jax explained, his face grim. "Zorn's loyalists have teamed up with a race called the Vex. Nasty bunch, obsessed with weapons that can wipe out whole star systems." Uma's eyes widened, her four hands clenching involuntarily. "The ship we encountered, that was Vex technology?" Jax nodded. "And that's not all. My sources say they've got a hidden base on an ice planet not far from here. Odds are, that's where they're decrypting the weapon schematics." Dennis absorbed this information, his mind racing with possibilities and dangers. He knew they needed to act fast, but their ship was still undergoing repairs. A difficult decision lay before him. "We'll split up," he announced, his voice firm. "Uma, Jax, and I will take Jax's stealth shuttle to infiltrate the Vex base. Kira, you stay here with the rest of the crew. Finish the repairs, and keep our new Lumina friends safe." As the team prepared for their respective missions, Dennis pulled Uma aside. They found a secluded spot in the caverns, where bioluminescent fungi cast a soft, intimate glow. Uma's alien features were even more striking in this light, her four arms moving with fluid grace as she turned to face him. "Dennis," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "This mission, the dangers we're facing." He reached out, taking two of her hands in his. "I know, but we've come too far to turn back now." Uma's other two hands came up to cup his face, her touch sending a shiver down his spine. "Just be careful. I couldn't bear to lose you." In response, Dennis pulled her close, their bodies fitting together in a way that defied their different physiologies. Their lips met in a passionate kiss, the bioluminescent cavern fading away as they lost themselves in each other. All too soon, it was time to depart. Dennis, Uma, and Jax boarded the smuggler's stealth shuttle, a sleek vessel designed for covert operations. As they lifted off, Dennis caught a last glimpse of the luminous glowing forms, waving farewell from the mouth of the cavern. The journey to the ice planet was tense and silent. Uma piloted the shuttle with expert precision, her forearms allowing her to manage multiple systems simultaneously. Jack sat in the co-pilot's seat, his eyes constantly scanning for signs of pursuit or detection. As they approached their destination, the planet's frozen surface came into view. Vast ice fields stretched as far as the eye could see, broken only by jagged mountain ranges and deep crevasses. There, Jax pointed to a seemingly unremarkable expanse of ice. The base entrance is hidden beneath that glacier. Uma guided the shuttle to a discreet landing site, the vessel's stealth systems ensuring they remained undetected. As they donned their thermal suits, Dennis couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation mixed with dread. Whatever lay ahead, he knew it would test them to their limits. With a hiss of depressurization, the shuttle's hatch opened. A blast of frigid air rushed in, carrying with it the promise of danger and the weight of their mission. Dennis took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. With a nod to his companions, he stepped out onto the icy surface, ready to face whatever challenges the Vex base might hold. Hold! The frozen landscape stretched before them, a stark contrast to the lush jungle they had left behind. As they trudged through the icy terrain, Dennis couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far bigger than they had anticipated. His suspicions were confirmed when they crested a ridge and spotted a sprawling complex nestled in a valley below. "That's no ordinary base," Jax muttered, his breath visible in the frigid air. Uma's eyes widened as she scanned the facility. "It's a fully operational Earth Command outpost. But how? This far beyond the frontier?" Before Dennis could respond, a heavily armed patrol emerged from a hidden entrance in the ice. The team tensed, hands hovering near their weapons, but a familiar voice crackled over their comms. "Stand down. You're on friendly ground." A figure stepped forward, her stern features partially obscured by a thermal hood. She pulled it back, revealing a shock of silver hair and piercing blue eyes. "Commander Elena Frost," she introduced herself, her voice as cold as their surroundings. "Welcome to Outpost Omega. I believe we have much to discuss." Inside the outpost, warmth flooded back into their limbs as Commander Frost led them to a secure briefing room. The walls were lined with holographic displays, each showing different sectors of space and intercepted transmissions. "We've been monitoring your progress," Frost explained, bringing up a detailed map of the sector. "Your encounter with the Vex has accelerated our timeline." Uma wasted no time. She plugged a data crystal into the central console, and the recovered weapon schematics flickered to life. "We need to decrypt this data immediately. It could be the key to stopping whatever the Vex are planning." Frost nodded, granting them access to the outpost's advanced systems. As Uma and Kira delved into the complex algorithms, Dennis briefed the commander on their journey so far. Hours passed in a flurry of activity. Dennis paced the room, his mind racing with potential diplomatic strategies. Jax cleaned his weapons, preparing for the inevitable conflict ahead. And Uma, her forearms moving in perfect synchronization, worked tirelessly at the decryption console. Suddenly, Uma gasped. By the stars. All eyes turned to her as she projected her findings onto the main screen. The weapon schematics were more than they had imagined. A terrifying fusion of Nigean and Vex technologies, capable of destabilizing entire star systems. "This goes beyond anything we've encountered," Kira said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dennis's face hardened in dedication. "We need reinforcements. Commander, can we contact Earth Command from here?" Frost nodded, leading them to a heavily shielded communications array. As Dennis began transmitting their urgent request for support, alarms blared throughout the facility. "Vex Patrol ship detected," an officer shouted. "They've intercepted our transmission." Frost's eyes narrowed. "Initiate emergency lockdown. All personnel to battle stations." The outpost transformed in seconds, blast shields slamming into place as defense systems hummed to life. Uma sprinted to the main control hub, her multiple arms allowing her to operate several systems at once. "I can coordinate our defenses," she called out. "But we're going to need every advantage we can get." Dennis turned to Frost. "Commander, if it comes to it, we may need to attempt negotiations with the Vex. I have experience in interspecies diplomacy dash." A massive explosion rocked the facility, cutting him off. Frost steadied herself against a console. "Diplomacy may have to wait, Ambassador. We're under attack." Through the reinforced viewport, Dennis watched as a Vex warship descended from the storm-racked sky, flanked by several smaller craft bearing the insignia of Zorn's loyalists. "Uma, status reporte." Frost barked. "Shields at 80% and holding," Uma replied, her hands flying over multiple interfaces. "But the power draw is immense. We can't sustain this indefinitely." As if in response to her words, the lights flickered ominously. Kira's eyes lit up with an idea. "The Nigean tech we salvaged. If I can integrate it into our power grid, it might give us the boost we need." Frost gave a curt nod. "Do it." As Kira raced off to modify the outpost systems, Dennis and Uma exchanged a look. Without a word, they knew what needed to be done. "We'll reinforce the main entrance," Dennis said, grabbing a pulse rifle from a nearby weapons rack. "If they breach the outer defenses, we'll be the last line." Uma's four hands each gripped a different weapon, her eyes glinting with persistence. "Let's show them what we're made of." They sprinted through the corridors, the sound of bombardment growing louder. As they reached the main entrance, they saw a squad of outpost security already in position. Dennis and Uma took cover behind reinforced barricades, watching as the massive doors began to glow red from the heat of Vex energy weapons. "Here they come," Dennis muttered, raising his rifle. With a deafening screech of tearing metal, the doors burst open. A wave of Vex soldiers poured in, their alien forms filled with weaponry. The air filled with the acrid smell of ozone as energy beams crisscrossed the entryway. Uma was a whirlwind of motion, her forearms allowing her to provide suppressing fire while simultaneously tossing grenades and coordinating with the defense systems via her neural link. Dennis found himself in awe of her capabilities, even as he focused on repelling the invasion. The battle raged on, a chaotic dance of light and sound. Dennis ducked and weaved, his diplomatic training giving way to years of combat experience. He and Uma moved in perfect synchronization, covering each other's blind spots and capitalizing on every opening. Suddenly, a Vex soldier broke through their line, its energy blade arcing towards Dennis. He twisted, narrowly avoiding a killing blow, but the searing energy sliced across his torso. Dennis stumbled, pain blossoming through his body. Uma saw her partner fall and let out a battle cry that would have made her Nigean ancestors proud. Her forearms became a blur of motion as she single-handedly drove back the Vex advance. With a grace that belied her fury, she scooped Dennis up and carried him to safety, still returning fire with her remaining arms. As Uma tended to Dennis's wounds, the lights throughout the outpost surged brightly. Kira's voice came over the comms, breathless but triumphant. Nigean tech integrated, power levels at 200% and climbing. Uma's eyes lit up. She reached out with her mind, interfacing with the outpost's newly empowered systems. A low hum filled the air, building to a crescendo as a massive energy field sprang to life around the facility. Outside, the Vex and Loyalist ships found themselves suddenly repelled, their weapons unable to penetrate the shimmering barrier. Confused and outmatched, they began a hasty retreat. As the sounds of battle faded, Uma turned her attention back to Dennis. Her lower hands worked to apply medical nanogel to his burn, while her upper hands gently cradled his face. "That was too close," she murmured, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and lingering fear. Dennis managed a weak smile. "We make quite a team, don't we?" Their moment was interrupted by Commander Frost's urgent voice over the comms. "All senior personnel to the command center immediately. We've made a critical discovery." Uma helped Dennis to his feet, supporting him as they made their way to the heart of the outpost. The command center was a flurry of activity, with Frost standing at the center, her face grim. "The weapon data contained more than schematics," she announced as they entered. "We've uncovered coordinates to a Vex mothership capable of mass-producing these planet killers." A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. The entire galaxy was at risk. Dennis straightened, ignoring the pain in his side. "Then we know our next move. We have to stop that mothership, regardless of the cost." Uma nodded, her four hands clenching in persistence. But how? A frontal assault would be suicide. As the team began to debate strategies, a transmission cut through their discussion. A familiar face appeared on the main screen, haggard and desperate. "Ambassador Zorn," Dennis breathed, surprised. The Nigean's voice was strained. "I have information about the Vex mothership. I'll share it in exchange for leniency. Please, we don't have much time." Dennis and Uma exchanged a look, years of partnership allowing them to communicate volumes without a word. They turned back to the screen, ready to hear what their former enemy had to say, knowing that their next decision could determine the fate of entire worlds. Worlds. Dennis took a deep breath, his mind racing with the implications of Zorn's offer. He glanced at Uma, reading the mix of caution and curiosity in her eyes. With a subtle nod to each other, they made their decision. "Ambassador Zorn," Dennis began, his voice steady despite the tension in the room, "we're willing to hear you out. But understand that this doesn't guarantee you anything. We'll need to verify your information before making any commitments." Zorn's image flickered, relief washing over his features. "Thank you, Ambassador. I'll transmit coordinates for a neutral meeting point, an abandoned mining facility on Asteroid X-273. I'll be there alone." As the transmission cut out, Commander Frost turned to Dennis and Uma. "This could be a trap," she warned. "Agreed," Dennis replied. "That's why we'll take precautions. Uma and I will go, but we'll need backup." Jack stepped forward, his hand resting on his weapon. "Count me in." Kira nodded, her eyes gleaming with perseverance. "I'll pilot. We'll take the stealth shuttle." Within hours, they were en route to the asteroid, the small craft humming quietly through the vastness of space. Uma sat at the controls, her forearms working in perfect harmony as she guided them through a field of space debris. Dennis watched her, marveling at her efficiency and grace. As they approached the asteroid, Jax ran a final weapons check. "Whatever happens in there," he said, his voice low, "we've got your backs." The shuttle touched down on the asteroid's cratered surface with barely a whisper. Dennis and Uma exited first, their environment suits protecting them from the harsh vacuum. They made their way to the entrance of the abandoned facility, its airlock long since stripped of power. Uma interfaced with the ancient system, her neural link bypassing years of neglect. With a hiss of escaping air, the inner door slid open, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Inside, they found Zorn waiting in what once must have been the facility's control room. The former ambassador looked a shell of his former self, his once pristine robes tattered and stained. His eyes darted nervously between Dennis and Uma as they entered. "You came?" Zorn said, his voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure you would." Dennis removed his helmet, fixing Zorn with a steady gaze. "We're here to listen, Ambassador. But make no mistake, we haven't forgotten your actions against Earth and Nige." Zorn nodded, his shoulders sagging. "I understand, and I deeply regret the choices I made. The Vex, they promised us power, technology beyond our wildest dreams. But it was all a lie." Uma's forearms crossed, her posture tense. "What happened? They used me." Zorn spat, bitterness dripping from every word. "Used my influence to gain access to our most advanced Nigean tech. And once they had what they wanted, they discarded me like space trash." As Zorn spoke, Uma's enhanced senses picked up on subtle cues, the tremor in his voice, the dilation of his pupils. She sent a neural message to Dennis. "He's telling the truth." Dennis nodded imperceptibly. "You mentioned information about their mothership. What exactly do you have?" Zorn produced a small data crystal. "Everything. Schematics, defense systems, power core locations. Even the command center layout." He held it out, his hand shaking slightly. "It's yours, in exchange for protection and amnesty." Dennis stepped forward, his diplomatic training kicking in. "Let's be clear, Zorn. We can't promise full amnesty. But if your information proves accurate and helps us stop the Vex threat, we'll ensure you're treated fairly in any subsequent proceedings." Zorn hesitated for a moment, then placed the crystal in Dennis's outstretched hand. "It's more than I deserve," he admitted quietly. With the exchange complete, they made their way back to the shuttle. As they lifted off, leaving Zorn behind on the asteroid, Dennis turned to Uma. "What do you think?" Uma's eyes were focused on the data crystal. "If this information is genuine, it could be the key to stopping the Vex once and for all." Back at the human outpost, the team wasted no time. Uma and Kira dove into the data, their fingers flying over holographic interfaces as they integrated Zorn's information with their existing intelligence. A massive 3D model of the Vex mothership slowly took shape in the center of the command room. Dennis watched in awe as the two worked, their minds seemingly operating on a different level. After hours of intense analysis, Uma looked up, her eyes bright with excitement. "We've found it," she announced. "A weakness in their energy shielding system. If we can exploit it, a small team could potentially infiltrate the mothership undetected." Commander Frost leaned in, studying the holographic model. "It's risky, but it might be our only shot." She turned to Dennis and Uma. "I'm allocating our most advanced stealth suits to this mission. They're designed to mask thermal and electronic signatures." As the team began to formulate their plan of attack, Dennis found himself working closely with Uma, their bodies often brushing against each other as they pored over schematics and tactical displays. The air between them seemed to crackle with an unspoken tension, intensified by the high stakes of their mission. Late one night, as they tested the stealth suits in a simulated environment, Dennis found himself alone with Uma in a narrow maintenance shaft. The close quarters forced them into intimate proximity, their faces mere inches apart. Uma's four hands moved with practiced ease, adjusting the settings on Dennis's suit. But as she worked, her movements slowed, her eyes locking with his. For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade away. Dennis felt his heart rate spike, his breath catching in his throat. Uma's alien features, once so foreign to him, now held an undeniable allure. Without thinking, he leaned in, closing the distance between them. Their lips met in a kiss that was both tender and urgent, years of unspoken feelings pouring out in a single moment. Uma's forearms wrapped around Dennis, pulling him closer as they lost themselves in the embrace. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Uma's eyes shimmered with emotion. Dennis, I. But before she could finish, an alarm blared throughout the facility. Commander Frost's voice came over the intercom, urgent and commanding. All personnel to battle stations. We have multiple Vex signatures approaching the system. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Dennis and Uma exchanged a look, the weight of their mission crashing back down upon them. With a shared nod of understanding, they raced towards the command center, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead in their fight against the Vex threat. The alarms blared through the facility as Dennis and Uma raced towards the command center. Their moment of intimacy was pushed aside, replaced by the urgent need to face the approaching Vex threat. As they burst into the command center, Commander Frost's holographic display showed a swarm of Vex ships entering the system. "They've found us," she said grimly. "We need to move now." Dennis nodded, his mind already shifting to mission mode. "We have the intel from Zorn. It's time to put it to use." Within hours, a small team was assembled. Dennis, Uma, Jax, and Kira boarded their stealth shuttle, each equipped with the advanced suits designed to mask their thermal and electronic signatures. As they approached the massive Vex mothership, Dennis felt a mix of awe and trepidation. The vessel dwarfed their shuttle, its angular form jam-packed with weapons and strange, pulsating energy fields. Uma's voice came through his helmet comm. "I've identified the weak point in their shielding. Sending coordinates now." The shuttle glided silently through the gap in the Vex defenses, touching down in a seldom-used docking bay. As they exited the craft, Dennis was struck by the alien architecture surrounding them. The walls seemed to pulse with an inner light, and strange symbols flickered across surfaces that appeared both solid and liquid. "Stay alert," Dennis whispered. "We don't know how long our stealth tech will hold up in here." They moved swiftly through the corridors, Uma's enhanced senses guiding them past patrols and through security checkpoints. But as they delved deeper into the ship, Dennis noticed Uma's expression growing increasingly concerned. "Something's wrong," she said, her forearms working furiously over a holographic interface. "The ship's internal defenses are adapting to our presence faster than anticipated." As if on cue, a nearby wall panel began to glow red, and a piercing alarm filled the air. Jax cursed under his breath. So much for stealth. What's the plan now? Dennis made a split-second decision. "We split up. Uma and I will continue to the power core. Jax, Kira, create a diversion and secure our exit route." As they parted ways, Dennis and Uma found themselves in a maze of twisting corridors. They moved with practiced efficiency, covering each other's blind spots as they encountered increasing resistance from Vex security forces. Turning a corner, they stumbled upon a vast chamber filled with pulsating energy fields and strange, half-formed machines. Uma's eyes widened. "A research lab," she breathed. "Look at this technology. It's a fusion of Vex and Nigean designs." Dennis stood guard as Uma's forearms flew over the control panels, downloading schematics and data at an incredible speed. "We can analyze it later. Right now, we need to dash." His words were cut off as a massive explosion rocked the ship. Alarms blared, and the sound of heavy footsteps echoed from nearby corridors. "Stealth's completely blown," Dennis said, readying his weapon. "We fight our way through." What followed was a blur of intense combat. Dennis and Uma moved as one, their earlier intimacy translating into perfect battlefield synchronization. Uma's multiple limbs became a whirlwind of offensive and defensive maneuvers, while Dennis coordinated their movements with practiced precision. As they battled through waves of Vex soldiers, Dennis felt a searing pain in his side. An energy blast had grazed him, burning through his suit. He stumbled, and Uma was there in an instant, her lower arm supporting him while her upper pair continued to return fire. "I've got you," she said, her voice tight with concern and persistence. They pressed on, Uma now half carrying Dennis, as they fought their way towards the power core. The corridors became narrower, the resistance heavier. Finally, they reached a maintenance shaft that led directly to their target. Dennis looked at the narrow opening, then at Uma. "You'll have to leave me. Complete the mission." Uma's eyes flashed with a fierce light. "Not a chance." Her forearms began to move in complex patterns, manipulating the very structure of the shaft. Metal groaned and shifted, creating just enough space for both of them to pass through. As they emerged into the power core chamber, they were met with the sight of dozens of elite Vex warriors. Dennis and Uma shared a look, no words needed to convey their shared commitment. Uma's fingers danced across her interface, causing chaos in the ship systems. False alarms drew away some of the guards, while Dennis used the last of his strength to overload nearby power conduits, creating a spectacular light show that disoriented the remaining Vex. With a path cleared, Uma sprinted to the main control panel. Her forearms worked in perfect harmony, inputting complex sequences to sabotage the core. Dennis positioned himself between her and the entrance, holding off waves of reinforcements with unbreakable spirit. Just as Uma shouted, "It's done!" a towering Vex commander entered the chamber. Its eye focused on Dennis, recognizing him as the primary threat. As it charged, Dennis drew on every fighting technique he knew, human and Nigean alike. The battle was fierce, but brief. Despite his injury, Dennis held his own, but he could feel his strength fading. Just as the commander was about to land a killing blow, the ship's internal defenses suddenly activated, turning on the Vex themselves. Uma grabbed Dennis, pulling him towards the exit. "I hacked the security protocols. We need to move. Now." They ran through corridors that were quickly becoming death traps, the ship tearing itself apart around them. They reached the airlock where their shuttle waited, only to find it guarded by a final squad of Vex soldiers. Uma's eyes narrowed. "I have an idea." In a display of skill that left Dennis in awe, Uma operated multiple weapon systems simultaneously, her forearms moving almost faster than the eye could follow. The Vex squad fell in seconds, clearing their path to escape. As Dennis piloted the shuttle away from the disintegrating mothership, they watched in stunned silence as the massive vessel exploded in a burst of blinding energy. The shockwave rippled through space, disabling much of the Vex fleet. In the quiet of the shuttle, Dennis and Uma's eyes met. No words were needed as they shared a moment of profound relief and connection. Their victory was complete, the Vex threat neutralized. Or so they thought. As they approached the human outpost, an urgent transmission from Commander Frost cut through their moment of peace. "We have a situation." Her voice crackled over the comm. "The mothership explosion. It's torn open a rift in space-time. We need you back here immediately." Dennis and Uma exchanged a look of disbelief. Their hard-won victory had led to an even greater challenge. As the outpost came into view, they steeled themselves for the next phase of their mission, knowing that the hope of the universe might once again rest in their hands. The outpost's landing bay bustled with activity as emergency crews rushed to meet their shuttle. As soon as the airlock cycled open, a stern-faced lieutenant ushered Dennis and Uma through the crowded corridors. "Commander Frost wants you in the secure briefing room immediately," he said, his voice tight with urgency. They hurried through the base, passing anxious faces and hearing snippets of worried conversations. The atmosphere was thick with tension, a stark contrast to the brief moment of triumph they had experienced aboard the shuttle. The briefing room door slid open, revealing Commander Frost bent over a holographic display. She looked up as they entered, her expression grim. "We have a critical situation. she said without preamble. Dennis and Uma exchanged glances as they took their seats. The commander manipulated the display, bringing up a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed and expanded before their eyes. The explosion of the Vex mothership has torn open a rift in space-time, Frost explained, her voice steady despite the gravity of her words. It's expanding at an alarming rate. If we don't find a way to close it, it will engulf nearby star systems within days. Uma leaned forward, her four eyes narrowing as she studied the data scrolling across the display. The energy signature, she murmured. It's similar to the experimental weapon we found on the Vex ship. Dennis nodded, his mind racing. Could we use that technology to our advantage? Uma's fingers flew across the interface, bringing up the schematics they had stolen. Possibly, if we could reverse engineer the weapon, we might be able to create a device capable of closing the rift. But, Frost prompted, sensing the hesitation in Uma's voice. But it would require an enormous amount of energy, Uma continued, and materials we don't have readily available here at the outpost. A heavy silence fell over the room as the implications sank in. Dennis stood up, pacing as he considered their options. Suddenly, he turned to face the others. The abandoned Vex outposts, he said. They're scattered throughout the frontier systems. If we could raid them for resources. Frost nodded slowly. It's risky, but it might be our only option. She tapped her comm unit. Jax, report to the briefing room immediately. Within minutes, Jax arrived, looking battle-worn but alert. Frost quickly brought him up to speed on the situation. Jax, I need you to lead a team of our best engineers, she ordered. Work with Uma to design and construct this rift-closing device. Dennis and Uma will handle the resource-gathering missions. As the meeting adjourned, Dennis and Uma found themselves alone in the corridor. The weight of their new mission pressed heavily upon them. Without a word, they moved closer, their bodies intertwining in a moment of silent comfort and shared perseverance. Uma's four arms wrapped around Dennis, her alien physiology no longer strange, but a source of strength and comfort. They held each other tightly, drawing willpower from their deepening bond. We should prepare, Uma said softly, her voice tinged with reluctance to break the moment. Dennis nodded, stepping back, but keeping one of Uma's hands clasped in his own. Let's gear up. We'll take the stealth shuttle again. We'll need every advantage we can get. They made their way to the armory, selecting weapons and equipment for their first mission. As Dennis checked the power cells on his rifle, Uma approached with a small device in her hand. I've modified our comms, she explained, attaching the device to Dennis's suit. It should allow us to maintain contact, even if we encounter Vex jamming technology. Dennis smiled, touched by her thoughtfulness. Always one step ahead, he said warmly. Within hours, they were boarding their shuttle, the cargo bay empty but ready to be filled with the resources they desperately needed. As the launch countdown began, Dennis looked over at Uma in the co-pilot seat. Ready? He asked. Uma's four eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Dennis had come to recognize as her version of a smile. With you? Always. The shuttle's engines ignited, propelling them away from the outpost and towards their first target, a desolate planetoid that had once housed a Vex mining operation. As they approached, the barren landscape came into view on their screens. No signs of active Vex presence, Uma reported, her hands moving swiftly over the sensor controls. But I'm detecting residual energy signatures consistent with their technology. Dennis guided the shuttle to a landing near what appeared to be the main entrance to the facility. As they exited the craft, the harsh wind whipped around them, carrying stinging particles of dust and rock. Stay alert, Dennis warned, scanning the area with his rifle raised. Just because the Vex are gone doesn't mean we're alone out here. They moved cautiously into the abandoned facility, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridors. The interior was a maze of twisting passageways and cavernous chambers filled with strange, dormant machinery. Uma's eyes widened as they entered what appeared to be the main processing center. "Look at this," she breathed, running her hands over a console covered in pulsating lights. "They left in a hurry. Most of this equipment is still operational." Dennis moved to a stack of containers in the corner, prying one open. Inside, he found a cache of refined materials, their surfaces glowing with an otherworldly energy. "Jackpot," he grinned. As they began to load their findings onto anti-grav sleds, a distant sound caught Dennis's attention. He held up a hand, signaling Uma to be quiet. The sound came again, the unmistakable whine of engines. "We've got company," Dennis hissed, moving to a vantage point near the entrance. Through his scope, he spotted a battered transport ship touching down next to their shuttle. A motley crew of armed figures began to emerge. "Scavengers," Uma said, her voice tight. "They must have detected our landing." Dennis's mind raced, assessing their options. They couldn't risk losing the materials they'd found, but they were outnumbered and their shuttle was potentially compromised. "We'll have to fight our way out," he decided, his voice grim. "Uma, can you use any of this Vex tech to our advantage?" Uma's eyes gleamed with perseverance as her hands flew over the nearby consoles. "I think so. Give me 2 minutes." As Dennis took up a defensive position, he could hear the scavengers approaching, their voices echoing through the facility. He checked his weapon one last time, knowing that the next few moments would determine not just their fate, but potentially that of entire star systems. The first scavenger rounded the corner, and Dennis opened fire. Fire. The scavenger dropped, and Dennis quickly took aim at the next target. "Uma, we're running out of time." Almost there. Uma's voice was strained as her fingers danced across the alien interface. Suddenly, the facility around them hummed to life. Lights flickered, and dormant machinery groaned back into operation. Dennis ducked as energy bolts from the scavenger's weapons sizzled past his head. He was about to return fire when the corridor filled with a deafening screech. The scavengers clutched their heads in pain, their weapons clattering to the ground. "Vex defense systems activated," Uma announced, a hint of pride in her voice. "Let's move." They sprinted through the twisting corridors, Uma manipulating control panels as they passed to seal off sections behind them. The scavengers' shouts of frustration echoed in the distance, growing fainter with each sealed door. As they reached their shuttle, Dennis's comm unit crackled to life. "Dennis, Uma, report to command immediately upon your return." Commander Frost's voice was tense. "We have a critical situation developing." The shuttle ride back to the outpost was tense, both of them acutely aware that their hard-won victory might be short-lived. As soon as they docked, they were met by a grim-faced lieutenant who escorted them directly to the command center. Commander Frost stood before a large holographic display, her face etched with concern. Around her, a diverse team of experts huddled in intense discussion. Dennis recognized Jax among them, looking haggard but determined. "Good, you're here," Frost said as they entered. "We've made progress on the rift closing device, but we've run into a significant problem. We're missing a crucial component, a rare element that we've only ever encountered in trace amounts." Uma stepped forward, her eyes scanning the schematics floating before them. "I recognize this," she said, her voice thoughtful. "It's similar to materials we saw in the Vex weapon systems." Frost nodded. "Exactly. Our intelligence suggests there's a hidden Vex supply cache on one of the moons orbiting the gas giant in the Cerberus system. It's our best shot at finding the element we need." Dennis felt a surge of adrenaline. "When do we leave?" "Immediately," Frost replied. "But there's a complication. We need insider knowledge to infiltrate the Vex facility." She paused, her expression troubled. "We're bringing an ambassador, Zorn." The room fell silent. Dennis felt his jaw clench at the mention of the former Nigean leader. Zorn's past allegiances with the Vex made him a controversial figure, to say the least. Can we trust him? Dennis asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Frost's gaze was steely. We don't have a choice. His knowledge of Vex systems and protocols is unparalleled. But make no mistake, he'll be under constant surveillance. As if on cue, the command center doors slid open, revealing Ambassador Zorn flanked by 2 armed guards. The Nigean's tall, willowy frame seemed diminished somehow, but his eyes still held a sharp intelligence. Ambassador, Frost acknowledged coolly. You've been briefed on the mission? Zorn nodded, his voice a low rasp. I understand the gravity of the situation, Commander. You have my full cooperation. Dennis exchanged a glance with Uma, noting the tension in her posture. They both knew the stakes were too high to let personal mistrust interfere, but the unease in the room was palpable. Assemble your team, Frost ordered, turning back to Dennis and Uma. You leave in 2 hours. This mission is our last hope of closing the rift before it's too late. As they left the command center to prepare, Dennis pulled Uma aside. I don't like this, he muttered. Zorn's presence complicates things. Uma's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, a gesture Dennis had learned indicated deep thought. We'll need to watch him closely, she agreed, but his knowledge could be the key to our success. They made their way to the armory, where they found Kira, their team's sharpshooter, already gearing up. The young woman's face was set in steadfast perseverance as she checked her long-range rifle. I heard about Zorn, she said as they approached. I'll keep an eye on him. Dennis nodded appreciatively. Good. We'll need everyone at their best for this one. As they suited up, Dennis couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more complex than a simple retrieval mission. The Vex moon would be heavily fortified, and Zorn's loyalties were far from certain. Uma approached, holding out a small device. I've modified our comms, she explained. They should work even if we encounter Vex jamming technology. Dennis smiled, grateful once again for her foresight. As he attached the device to his suit, he caught her gaze. No words were needed. They both understood the weight of what lay ahead. The next 2 hours passed in a blur of preparations. As they boarded the specially modified stealth shuttle, Dennis took a moment to survey his team. Uma, her 4 arms moving with practiced efficiency as she ran pre-flight checks. Kira, her eyes sharp and watchful, especially when they fell on Zorn. And the ambassador himself, standing apart from the others, his alien features unreadable. As the shuttle's engines roared to life, Dennis felt a familiar mix of anticipation and dread. They were heading into unknown territory, with the fate of entire star systems hanging in the balance. Whatever lay ahead on that fortified Vex moon, he knew that nothing would be the same after this mission. The shuttle lifted off, quickly leaving the outpost behind. As they accelerated towards their destination, the vastness of space stretched out before them, beautiful and terrifying in its immensity. Somewhere out there, a rift in space-time was growing, threatening to engulf everything in its path. And they were the only ones who could stop it. Dennis took his place in the pilot's seat, his hands steady on the controls. Everyone strap in, he called out. We're about to make the jump to hyperspace. As the stars blurred into streaks of light around them, Dennis exchanged a look with Uma. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The mission to the Vex moon had begun. Begun would test every skill and resource they possessed. As the shuttle emerged from hyperspace, the Vex moon loomed before them, a desolate orb scarred by ancient impact craters and the remnants of vast mining operations. Dennis guided the craft towards a shadowed ravine, hoping to avoid detection by any automated defense systems. Initiating stealth protocols, Uma announced, her 4 arms working in perfect synchronization across multiple control panels. Sensors show no active Vex signatures, but there's a lot of residual energy. Stay alert. They touched down in a cloud of dust, the shuttle's engines powering down with a low whine. Dennis turned to address the team, his eyes lingering on Zorn for a moment. Remember, we're here for one thing only, the rare element. In and out as quickly as possible. As they disembarked, the harsh landscape stretched out before them, littered with abandoned Vex machinery and strange crystalline formations. Kira took point, her rifle scanning for any sign of movement, while Uma consulted a handheld device, its screen flickering with complex data streams. The cache should be located in a subterranean complex about half a kilometer in that direction, Zorn said, pointing towards a jutting cliff face. His voice was calm, but Dennis noticed a slight tremor in his elongated fingers. They moved swiftly across the uneven terrain, each step kicking up swirls of metallic dust. As they approached the cliff, Uma's device began to emit a series of high-pitched beeps. Energy readings are spiking, she reported, her four eyes widening. Something's powering up nearby. Before Dennis could respond, the ground beneath their feet shuddered. With a grinding screech, a section of the cliff face split open, revealing a yawning entrance framed by pulsing Vex technology. It's an automated response, Zorn explained, his voice tinged with both excitement and apprehension. The facility recognizes my presence. Dennis felt a chill run down his spine. I don't like this. It could be a trap. We don't have a choice, Uma said softly, placing one of her hands on his arm. The element we need is in there. With a nod, Dennis led the team into the Vex complex. The air inside was stale and charged with an otherworldly energy that made their skin prickle. Strange geometric patterns adorned the walls, shifting and realigning themselves as they passed. Zorn moved with increasing confidence, guiding them through a maze of twisting corridors. The main storage vault should be just ahead, he announced as they entered a vast chamber filled with humming machinery. Uma rushed to a central console, her fingers flying over the alien interface. I've found it, she exclaimed. The element is here, but the extraction process is complex. I'll need a few minutes. As Uma worked, Dennis and Kira took up defensive positions, their weapons at the ready. The facility around them seemed to pulse with an eerie light, as if awakening from a long slumber. Suddenly, a deep rumble shook the chamber. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling as a massive portal began to form at the far end of the room. Uma, we need to go now, Dennis shouted over the growing cacophony. Almost there, she called back, her forearms a blur of motion as she worked to extract the precious element. The portal stabilized, its surface a swirling vortex of energy. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like tearing metal, a squadron of Vex war machines began to emerge. Incoming, Kira yelled, opening fire on the first wave of mechanical horrors. Dennis joined her, his rifle spitting energy bolts that tore through the Vex ranks. But for every machine they destroyed, two more seemed to take its place. I've got it! Uma's triumphant cry cut through the chaos. She held aloft a small container, its contents glowing with an otherworldly light. Fall back to the shuttle, Dennis ordered, laying down covering fire as the team began their retreat. They raced through the twisting corridors, the sounds of pursuing Vex echoing behind them. As they burst out of the complex, Dennis's heart sank. A massive Vex warship loomed in the sky above their shuttle, its weapons charging with a menacing hum. We'll never make it, Kira said, her voice tight with fear. Just as all seemed lost, the sky erupted in a dazzling display of weapons fire. A fleet of sleek, organic-looking ships dropped out of warp, their energy beams cutting through the Vex forces with surgical precision. Unknown vessels, Uma reported, her eyes wide with wonder. They're protecting us. With the Vex forces in disarray, Dennis seized their chance. Everyone in the shuttle now. They piled in, Dennis's hands flying over the controls as he initiated an emergency takeoff. The shuttle rocketed into the atmosphere, narrowly avoiding the debris of the disintegrating Vex warship. As they broke free of the moon's gravity well, Dennis finally allowed himself a moment to breathe. He looked over at Uma, who cradled the container with their hard-won prize. "We did it," he said softly. Uma's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, her version of a smile. "We did. But, Dennis, who were those ships? And why did they help us?" Before he could answer, the shuttle's comm system crackled to life. Commander Frost's voice came through, tense and urgent. "Dennis, Uma, report to command immediately upon your return," she said. "We have a critical situation developing." Dennis exchanged a glance with Uma, both of them acutely aware that their hard-won victory might be short-lived. As the shuttle accelerated towards home, the mystery of their unknown saviors and the looming threat of the expanding rift caused great concern on their minds. Little did they know that their return to the outpost would mark the beginning of an even greater challenge, one that would test not only their skills and courage, but also the very nature of their relationship and the future of interspecies cooperation in the face of an unprecedented cosmic threat. As the shuttle docked at the outpost, Dennis and Uma exchanged worried glances. The urgency in Commander Frost's voice had been unmistakable. They rushed through the airlock, still carrying the container with the precious element. The corridors were a flurry of activity, with personnel hurrying in all directions. Alarms blared intermittently, adding to the sense of impending crisis. As they entered the command center, they were met with a scene of controlled chaos. Commander Frost stood at the center, her face etched with lines of concern as she barked orders to a team of technicians. "Report," she said tersely as Dennis and Uma approached. Dennis held up the container. "We have the element, Commander. But what's happening here?" Frost's eyes narrowed. "The rift's expansion has accelerated beyond our worst projections. We're already seeing gravitational anomalies in nearby systems. I've ordered an immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel." Uma's 4 eyes blinked rapidly, processing the information. "How long do we have?" "Hours at best," Frost replied. "We need that rift closing device operational now." Dennis nodded, his mind focused. "We'll get right on it. Where are Jax and Kira?" "In the lab," Frost said, gesturing towards the door. "Go. We're counting on you." They hurried to the lab, finding Jax and Kira already hard at work. The room was a maze of complex machinery and holographic displays, all centered around a large, pulsing device that Dennis recognized as the prototype Rift Closer. Jax looked up as they entered, relief evident on his face. "You made it back. Did you get it?" Uma carefully placed a container on a nearby workstation. "We did, but integrating it won't be easy." "We don't have a choice," Kira said, her eyes never leaving the readout she was studying. "The Rift's energy signature is becoming increasingly unstable." Without another word, they set to work. Uma's 4 arms moved in a blur, manipulating delicate components with incredible precision. Dennis and Jax focused on recalibrating the device's power systems, while Kira coordinated with the outpost defensive teams. Hours passed in a haze of intense concentration. Dennis noticed Uma's movements becoming less fluid, her normally vibrant skin taking on a pallid hue. He placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the tension in her muscles. "Uma, you need to rest," he said softly. She shook her head, all 4 eyes focused on her task. "There's no time. We have to finish this." "You won't be any help if you collapse," Dennis insisted. "Take 15 minutes. Please." After a moment's hesitation, Uma nodded. They moved to a quiet corner of the lab, both sinking gratefully into chairs. "Dennis," Uma said after a moment, her voice low, "about the Zalcari offer." He met her gaze, understanding the unspoken question. "The enhanced compatibility?" "Yes. I've been thinking about it. If we survive this." Dennis took one of her hands in his. Let's focus on surviving first. Then we can consider all our options. Their moment of respite was interrupted by Jax's urgent call. We've got a problem. Vex scout ships have been detected near the outpost. They rushed back to the workstation, where Jax pointed to a holographic display showing several small vessels circling at the edge of their sensor range. They're scanning us, Kira reported, her voice tight, trying to gather intel on our defenses and the rift closer. Commander Frost's voice came over the comm system. I'm deploying stealth fighters to monitor their activity. Keep working on that device. It's our only hope. As they redoubled their efforts, Uma made a startling discovery. The Zalcari technology requires a specific type of energy source to function at full capacity. An isotope we don't have here. Dennis felt his heart sink. Where can we get it? Jax quickly ran a search through the outpost database. There's an asteroid field not far from here that likely contains the isotope, but with the rift's current state, it'll be incredibly dangerous, Kira finished. Dennis straightened, his mind made up. I'll go. We've come too far to fail now. Not alone you won't, Uma said, her tone brooking no argument. You'll need my piloting skills to navigate that field. Before Dennis could protest, Commander Frost's voice cut in. Absolutely not. I can't risk both of you on such a perilous mission. A heated debate ensued, with Uma arguing passionately for her inclusion. Finally, a compromise was reached. Dennis and Uma would go, but with a heavily armed escort of the outpost's best pilots. As they prepared for the mission, Ambassador Zorn approached Dennis, his tall frame casting a shadow over the equipment they were gathering. I have something that might help, Zorn said, his voice low and urgent. Experimental Nigean shielding technology. It could protect you from the rift's gravitational anomalies. Dennis hesitated, weighing the potential benefits against the risk of trusting the former Vex ally. Is it safe? Zorn's alien features twisted into what might have been a grimace. It's untested in these conditions, but it may be your only chance. With time running out and options limited, Dennis made his decision. Do it. Install the shielding on our shuttle. As the modified shuttle lifted off, Dennis took one last look at the outpost through the view screen. The rift loomed in the distance, a tear in the fabric of space that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. He turned to Uma, who sat at the controls, her forearms dancing across the complex array of instruments. Ready? He asked. Uma's eyes met his, commitment shining in all four. Always. The shuttle accelerated, plunging into the unknown as they raced against time to save not just the outpost, but entire civilizations from the ever-expanding threat of the rift. Rift's ever-expanding threat. As they approached the asteroid field, Dennis felt the shuttle shudder under the strain of the gravitational anomalies. Uma's forearms worked in perfect harmony, adjusting their course with precision that no human pilot could match. Entering the field now, Uma announced, her voice tight with concentration. Scanning for the isotope. The view screen filled with a chaotic dance of rocky debris, some chunks as large as small moons. Dennis gripped his seat as Uma navigated through the treacherous obstacles, the experimental Nigean shielding humming with energy as it protected them from the worst of the gravitational distortions. There! Dennis pointed to a cluster of asteroids ahead, the scanners picking up a strong signature. Uma nodded, guiding the shuttle closer. As they approached, a massive gravitational wave hit them, sending the shuttle into a wild spin. Dennis felt his stomach lurch as Uma fought to regain control. Hold on, she cried, her forearms a blur of motion across the controls. With a series of precise maneuvers, Uma stabilized the shuttle, bringing them alongside the asteroid containing the precious isotope. Dennis wasted no time, donning his EVA suit and preparing for extraction. Be careful out there, Uma said, her eyes filled with concern. Dennis gave her a reassuring nod before stepping into the airlock. As he emerged into the void, the full scope of their predicament became clear. The rift loomed in the distance, a tear in the fabric of space that seemed to pulse with malevolent energy. Working quickly, Dennis used a specialized drill to extract the isotope. Each second felt like an eternity as he watched the rift's tendrils creep ever closer. With the sample finally secured, he rushed back to the shuttle. "I've got it," he announced as he re-entered the cockpit. "Let's get out of here." Uma didn't need to be told twice. She fired up the engines, plotting a course back to the outpost. As they emerged from the asteroid field, a squadron of Vex ships appeared on their scanners. "They've found us," Dennis said, his voice grim. Uma's response was to push the shuttle to its limits, weaving through the oncoming fire with incredible skill. The experimental shielding held, deflecting the worst of the Vex attacks. As they approached the outpost, they saw the combined human and Nigean defense fleet engaged in a fierce battle with the Vex forces. Uma guided their shuttle through the chaos, dodging debris and energy blasts. They landed hard, the shuttle's hull groaning under the strain. Without wasting a moment, Dennis and Uma sprinted towards the lab, the precious isotope clutched tightly in Dennis's arms. The lab was a hive of activity as they burst in. Jax and Kira looked up from their work, relief evident on their faces. "You made it," Jax said, quickly taking the isotope from Dennis. "We're almost ready. This is the final piece we need." Uma immediately set to work, her forearms moving with incredible precision as she integrated the isotope into the rift-closing device. Dennis watched in awe as she manipulated components too small for human hands to manage effectively. "Energy levels are stabilizing," Kira reported, her eyes fixed on a holographic display. "But we're detecting a massive surge in the rift's expansion rate." Commander Frost's voice crackled over the intercom. "The Vex fleet has regrouped and is advancing on our position. All available fighters are being deployed to defend the outpost." Dennis exchanged a worried glance with Uma. They both knew that if the Vex destroyed the device before it could be activated, all hope would be lost. "We need more time," Uma said, her voice strained as she worked to complete the final calibrations. Dennis made a split-second decision. "I'm contacting the Zalcari. We need their help." Ignoring the surprised looks from his teammates, Dennis opened a secure channel to High Emissary Zelna. He quickly explained their desperate situation, appealing to the Zalcari's sense of galactic responsibility. After a tense moment, Zelna responded, "We will send ships to aid in your defense. The rift threatens us all." As reports of Zalcari vessels joining the battle filtered in, Uma suddenly stepped back from the device, her four eyes wide with concern. "There's a problem," she announced. "The energy required to close the rift. It's going to create a feedback loop. Someone will have to manually operate the device from close range. It's a suicide mission." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Dennis felt his heart racing, knowing that he couldn't ask anyone else to make such a sacrifice. Before he could speak, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "I'll do it." They turned to see Ambassador Zorn standing in the doorway, his alien features set with perseverance. "Zorn?" Dennis asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "But why?" The Nigean diplomat stepped forward. "My earlier actions, my betrayal, it was all part of a greater plan, to ensure the survival of both our peoples. Let me make amends. Let me do this one last thing to secure our future." Dennis studied Zorn's face, seeing the sincerity in his alien eyes. Despite his lingering doubts, he knew they had no other choice. "All right," Dennis nodded, "but we need to move now. The Vex are closing in." As if to emphasize his point, the outpost shook with the impact of a nearby explosion. Alarms blared throughout the complex. "We need to get the device to the rift's edge," Kira said, already moving to prepare a transport ship. Dennis turned to Uma, their eyes meeting in a moment of unspoken understanding. Whatever happened next, they would face it together. As they rushed to load the rift-closing device onto the heavily armored transport, the sounds of battle grew ever closer. The combined human, Nigean, and newly arrived Zalkari forces fought desperately to hold back the Vex onslaught. But time was running out. Dennis, Uma, and Zorn boarded the transport, each acutely aware of the monumental task that lay ahead. As Uma took the controls, Dennis manned the defensive systems, ready to fend off any Vex ships that might break through their allies' lines. The transport ship lifted off, carrying with it the hopes of countless worlds. As they ascended into the chaos of the space battle above, Dennis couldn't help but wonder if they would be able to stop the rift in time, or if the galaxy as they knew it was about to be changed forever. Forever. The transport ship rocketed towards the rift's edge, its hull groaning under the strain of gravitational forces. As they approached their destination, the moon's surface began to tremble. Cracks spider-webbed across the barren landscape, and plumes of dust erupted from widening fissures. Dennis gripped the controls tighter, his fingers tightening with tension. "We need to set down quickly," Uma said, her four eyes scanning the rapidly deteriorating terrain. "There, that flat area near the rift's edge." Dennis guided the ship down, the landing struts absorbing the impact as they touched down on the unstable surface. Zorn was the first out, carrying the rift-closing device with a dedication that belied his earlier deception. As they rushed to set up the device, the ground beneath their feet lurched violently. A chasm opened mere meters from where they stood, forcing them to scramble back towards the ship. "The moon's breaking apart," Dennis shouted over the rumble of shifting rock. "We can't stay here." Uma's four arms worked in concert, making last-minute adjustments to the device. "It's now or never. Zorn, are you ready?" The Nigean diplomat nodded grimly. "I'll see this through. Get to safety." Dennis and Uma retreated to the transport ship, watching anxiously as Zorn activated the rift-closing device. A brilliant beam of energy shot from the machine, connecting with the pulsating edge of the rift. As the device hummed to life, the lunar surface became increasingly unstable. Massive chunks of rock broke free, floating upward in the fluctuating gravity field. Dennis fired up the engines, lifting the transport ship off the ground just as a chasm opened beneath them. "We can't leave Zorn," Uma protested, her eyes fixed on the lone figure at the controls of the device. "We don't have a choice," Dennis replied, his voice heavy with regret. "If we stay, we'll all be lost." They hovered at a safe distance, watching as Zorn worked to maintain the device's alignment. The rift's edges began to waver, contracting slowly but steadily. Suddenly, a massive Vex warship broke through the defensive line of the Allied fleet. It loomed over the moon, its weapons charging with ominous energy. "They're going to fire on the device," Uma exclaimed, her four hands flying over the sensor displays. Before Dennis could respond, a blinding beam lanced out from the Vex ship, striking the moon's surface dangerously close to Zorn and the rift-closing device. The impact sent shockwaves across the lunar landscape, causing further fragmentation. Through the transport ship's view screen, they watched helplessly as Zorn struggled to keep the device operational. The Nigean's form wavered, clearly weakened by the intense radiation surrounding the rift. Uma's voice was filled with anguish. "We have to do something. The device is destabilizing." Dennis knew she was right. Without intervention, all their efforts would be for naught. He saw the tenacity in Uma's eyes and knew what she was planning before she even moved. "Uma, wait, he started, but she was already donning an environmental suit, her forearms moving with practiced efficiency. "Someone has to go," she said, her voice muffled by the helmet. "I'm the only one who can operate that device quickly enough." Before Dennis could stop her, Uma had cycled through the airlock. He watched, heart in his throat, as she used a handheld propulsion unit to launch herself towards the rift-closing device. Dennis was torn. Every instinct screamed at him to follow her, to protect her. But he knew that abandoning the transport ship would leave them without a means of escape. Reluctantly, he remained at the controls, maneuvering the ship to provide what little cover he could against debris and enemy fire. Uma reached the device just as Zorn collapsed. She caught the Nigerian diplomat, easing him to the ground before taking his place at the controls. Her forearms moved in a blur, adjusting settings and stabilizing the energy output. Above them, the space battle raged. The Vex warship, recognizing the threat posed by the device, broke away from the main engagement. It began a direct approach towards the moon, its weapons charging for another devastating strike. Dennis watched in horror as the massive ship bore down on Uma's position. But before it could fire, a squadron of fighters intercepted its path. He recognized Kira's ship leading the charge, executing a series of daring maneuvers that drew the Vex ship's fire. The rift continued to contract, but the process was taking its toll on the surrounding space. Gravitational eddies buffeted the transport ship, forcing Dennis to use every ounce of his piloting skill to maintain position. He could only imagine the forces Uma was enduring on the surface. Just when it seemed the situation couldn't get any more dire, a new ship emerged from hyperspace. Dennis's sensors identified it as a Valkyrie cruiser. It moved into position near the moon, projecting a powerful energy shield around Uma, Zorn, and the rift-closing device. A communication channel opened, and the voice of High Emissary Zelna filled the transport ship's cockpit. "We've developed a method to extract your people safely once the rift is closed. Hold your position, human." Dennis acknowledged the transmission, his eyes never leaving Uma's distant form. She stood resolutely at the device's controls, her environmental suit already showing signs of damage from the intense energies surrounding her. The rift's edges collapsed inward at an increasing rate, and the Vex warship made one final, desperate move. It altered course, aiming to ram directly into the moon's surface. Dennis's heart raced as he watched the massive ship bear down on them. But before it could complete its suicidal run, a group of Nigerian battleships led by Jax moved to intercept. They concentrated their fire on a weak point in the warship's hull, their combined firepower tearing through the Vex ship's defenses. The warship erupted in a series of explosions, breaking apart in a spectacular display of destruction. With the immediate threat eliminated, all eyes turned to the rift. Uma made a series of final adjustments, her movements becoming sluggish as fatigue and radiation took their toll. The device emitted a pulse of energy so bright that Dennis had to shield his eyes. When he looked again, the rift was gone. In its place was empty space, the stars beyond shining undisturbed. The gravitational anomalies began to subside, and an eerie calm settled over the battlefield. The Valkyrie cruiser moved swiftly, using a tractor beam to retrieve Uma, Zorn, and the now-inert rift-closing device. Dennis piloted the transport ship towards the larger vessel, his heart pounding with a mixture of relief and anxiety. As he docked with the Valkyrie ship, Dennis saw medical teams rushing to treat the retrieved heroes. He made his way to the medical bay, finding Uma lying on a bio-bed, her forearms limp at her sides. She was pale and weakened, but alive. Dennis took her hand, feeling a surge of emotion as her eyes fluttered open. Before he could speak, a communication from Commander Frost interrupted the moment. "We've neutralized the immediate threat," Frost reported, her voice tight with lingering tension. "But our long-range sensors are detecting residual anomalies throughout nearby star systems. This isn't over yet." Dennis looked down at Uma, seeing the dedication returning to her eyes despite her weakened state. He knew that their journey was far from complete, but for now, they had earned a moment of respite. As the Valkyrie ship prepared to depart, Dennis began to consider their next moves, knowing that the challenges ahead would require all of their combined skills and newfound alliances. Alliance and newfound allies would be crucial in facing the challenges that lay ahead. The Valkyrie cruiser smoothly entered hyperspace, its advanced engines humming with barely perceptible vibration. Dennis sat beside Uma's bio bed, watching the steady rise and fall of her chest as the ship's medical team worked tirelessly to stabilize her condition. Within hours, they emerged from hyperspace near the Valkyrie homeworld. Dennis's eyes widened as he took in the sight of the alien planet through the view screen. Massive crystalline structures jutted from the surface, their facets refracting starlight in dazzling patterns. Orbiting platforms bustled with activity, a testament to the advanced civilization that called this world home. As they descended through the atmosphere, Dennis marveled at the otherworldly landscape below. Bioluminescent forests pulsed with soft light, while towering spires of impossibly smooth material reached towards the sky. The cruiser touched down on a landing pad adjacent to a sprawling medical complex, its architecture a blend of organic curves and precise geometric forms. Medical personnel swarmed the ship as soon as the hatch opened. Uma was carefully transferred to a hovering stretcher, her four limp arms secured gently at her sides. Dennis moved to follow, but a gentle hand on his shoulder stopped him. "You must allow them to work," High Emissary Zelna said, her multifaceted eyes gleaming with empathy. "Our medical technology is the most advanced in known space. Your friend is in good hands." Dennis nodded reluctantly, watching as Uma disappeared into the facility. He turned to Zelna, his expression a mix of gratitude and concern. "Thank you for everything you've done. What happens now?" The High Emissary gestured for Dennis to follow her. As they walked through the complex, she explained, "We've detected residual anomalies in nearby star systems. These could be aftereffects of the rift closure, or perhaps indications of further Vex activity. We must investigate immediately." They entered a vast command center, where holographic displays showed real-time data from across the sector. Commander Frost's image appeared on a central screen, her face etched with purpose. "Dennis, good to see you," Frost said. "We're establishing a joint task force to address these anomalies. I need you to coordinate with the Valkyrie and Nigean representatives. We can't afford to let our guard down." As Dennis immersed himself in the work of organizing the multi-species task force, days blended into weeks. He spent his limited free time exploring the Valkyrie capital, marveling at their technological achievements and unique culture. Each night, he visited Uma in the medical facility, watching as her condition slowly improved under the care of the alien doctors. It was during one of these visits that Ambassador Zorn approached him, the Nigean steps hesitant but purposeful. "Dennis, I've been working with the Valkyrie medical team. They believe they've developed a treatment that could restore functionality to Uma's arms." Dennis listened intently as Zorn explained the proposed procedure, a combination of Valkyrie energy manipulation techniques and Nigean regenerative technology. The potential benefits were significant, but so were the risks. After careful consideration and a long discussion with a now conscious Uma, Dennis agreed to the experimental treatment. As preparations began, an urgent message came through from the Joint Task Force. "We've detected Vex activity in a nearby system," Kira reported, her holographic image flickering with static. "There's a mixed human and Nigean colony under attack. We need to move fast." Dennis felt torn, his gaze shifting between the message display and Uma's biobed. Uma reached out with her mind, her thoughts clear despite her physical weakness. "Go. They need you more than I do right now." With a heavy heart, Dennis prepared to depart. He entrusted Uma's care to Ambassador Zorn and the Valkyrie medical team, then boarded a waiting ship to join the task force. The journey to the embattled colony was tense, filled with tactical discussions and contingency planning. As they dropped out of hyperspace, the scene that greeted them was one of chaos. Vex drones swarmed around the small planetary outpost, while larger ships exchanged fire with the colony's meager defenses. Dennis took command of a ground team, coordinating with Kira and Jackson orbit. They fought their way through waves of Vex forces, evacuating colonists and pushing back the robotic invaders. In the midst of the battle, Dennis discovered the true objective of the Vex attack, a cache of ancient artifacts hidden beneath the colony. Recognizing the potential importance of these relics, Dennis ordered them secured and transported to their ship. As the evacuation neared completion, a massive Vex warship emerged from hyperspace, its imposing form casting a shadow over the battlefield. Drawing on his experience from the Rift battle, Dennis coordinated a daring assault on the warship. The combined human, Nigean, and Zalkari forces struck at the ship's weak points, but its advanced shields proved resilient. In a moment of inspiration, Dennis recalled a detail from Uma's work on the Rift closing device. He quickly transmitted a series of commands, recalibrating their weapons to match the frequency of the residual anomalies they detected. The effect was immediate. Their recalibrated weapons tore through the Vex shields, inflicting heavy damage on the massive ship. Unable to withstand the onslaught, the Vex warship retreated into hyperspace, leaving behind a field of debris and disabled drones. As the task force secured the area and tended to the wounded, Dennis oversaw the recovery of the ancient artifacts. His mind raced with questions about their origin and purpose, wondering if they held the key to understanding the Vex and their intentions. Just as they prepared to return to the Zalkari homeworld, an urgent transmission came through from Ambassador Zorn. Uma's procedure had been completed, but unforeseen complications had arisen. The combination of alien technologies had triggered rapid, unpredictable changes in her physiology. Concern gripped Dennis as he ordered the task force to return at maximum speed. As they hurtled through hyperspace, he pored over the preliminary data on the artifacts, searching for any connection to Uma's condition. The pieces of a larger puzzle seemed to be falling into place, but the complete picture remained frustratingly out of reach. As the Zalkari homeworld came into view, Dennis steeled himself for whatever challenges lay ahead. Uma's uncertain fate, the mysteries of the ancient artifacts, and the lingering threat of the Vex all greatly troubled on his mind. He knew that the next steps they took could have far-reaching consequences for not just their alliance, but potentially the entire galaxy. The Zalkari homeworld loomed large in the view screen as Dennis's ship dropped out of hyperspace. His heart raced, thoughts consumed by Uma's uncertain fate. As soon as the ship touched down, he sprinted towards the medical facility, barely registering the crystalline structures and bioluminescent flora around him. Dennis burst through the facility's entrance, his eyes scanning frantically for any sign of Uma or the medical team. A Zalkari attendant noticed his distress and quickly guided him to a specialized wing of the complex. As they approached a sealed door, Dennis heard the muffled sound of alarms and urgent voices. The attendant pressed their hand to a biometric scanner, and the door slid open with a soft hiss. The scene that greeted Dennis was one of controlled chaos. Zalkari medical personnel moved with practiced efficiency around a large, transparent chamber at the center of the room. Inside, Uma's form writhed and contorted, her forearms moving in erratic patterns. Chief Physician Zelare approached Dennis, her multifaceted eyes reflecting the pulsing lights of the medical equipment. "Your arrival is timely," she said, her voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "Uma's condition is unprecedented." Dennis pressed his hand against the chamber's wall, watching as Uma's skin flickered with a soft, otherworldly glow. "What's happening to her?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Zelare gestured to a series of holographic displays surrounding the chamber. "The combination of our energy manipulation techniques and Nigean regenerative technology has triggered a rapid physiological transformation. Her body is adapting to incorporate aspects of Zalkari biology, allowing her to process and manipulate energy in ways we've never seen before." As if to emphasize the point, Uma's arms suddenly stretched and contorted, reaching lengths that should have been impossible for her Nigean physiology. The medical equipment surrounding her chamber crackled with energy, struggling to contain the power emanating from her altered form. "We're doing everything we can to stabilize her condition," ZLRA continued, "but the rate of change is putting immense strain on her body." Before Dennis could respond, the facility's doors slid open once more. Ambassador Zorn entered, his usually composed demeanor replaced by visible concern. In his hands, he carried a data pad displaying complex schematics and alien script. "Dennis," Zorn said, his voice tight with urgency, "I've been analyzing the artifacts we recovered. There's a connection to Uma's condition." As Zorn explained his findings about the ancient species and their ability to manipulate cosmic energy, Dennis's mind raced. He looked back at Uma, her luminescent form pulsing with untapped power, and made a decision. "We need to use the artifact's technology," Dennis said, turning to ZLRA. "It might be our only chance to stabilize her." The chief physician's expression tightened. "The risks are dash." Her words were cut short by a violent surge of energy from Uma's chamber. The facility's lights flickered, and several pieces of equipment sparked dangerously. "We don't have a choice," Dennis insisted. "If we don't act now, we might lose her." ZLRA nodded grimly and began issuing orders to her team. High Emissary Zelna arrived moments later, bringing with her a group of Zalkari scientists. They set to work immediately, adapting the ancient technology to interface with their medical equipment. As preparations continued, alarms blared throughout the facility. A holographic display materialized, showing a Vex scouting party launching an attack on the Zalkari homeworld. Dennis felt torn, his instincts pulling him in two directions. He locked eyes with Zorn, who nodded in understanding. "Go," the ambassador said. "I'll coordinate the defense. You're needed here." With a grateful nod, Dennis turned his attention back to Uma. Her condition was deteriorating rapidly, her body alternating between absorbing massive amounts of energy and discharging it in dangerous bursts. The Zalkari team worked with incredible speed, their movements precise despite the chaos around them. As they made the final adjustments to their equipment, Dennis noticed patterns in Uma's movements. They reminded him of the complex gestures she had used while operating the rift-closing device. Acting on instinct, Dennis rushed to the control panel. His fingers flew across the alien interface, inputting a series of commands that synchronized the energy flow with Uma's movements. The effect was immediate. Uma's body began to stabilize, her actions becoming more controlled and purposeful. The cosmic energy from the artifact melded with her altered physiology, creating a harmonious balance. Suddenly, a massive surge of power coursed through the chamber. Uma's four arms moved in perfect unison, channeling and distributing the cosmic forces. The surge overwhelmed the facility systems, plunging the room into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Then, emergency power flickered on, bathing the room in a soft blue glow. Dennis blinked, his eyes adjusting to the light. The containment chamber's walls had retracted, and there, standing in its center, was Uma. She stepped forward, her forearms moving with a grace and power that seemed almost supernatural. Her skin glowed with an inner light, and her eyes held a depth that spoke of newfound knowledge and ability. "Dennis," Uma said, her voice carrying an otherworldly resonance. She reached out, embracing him with all four arms. Dennis gasped, feeling the incredible strength in her grip. Their moment of reunion was cut short by another blare of alarms. The Vex attack was intensifying, and the defenses were struggling to hold. Uma pulled back, her expression resolute. "We need to help," she said, flexing her enhanced limbs. "I can feel the power inside me. I can make a difference." Dennis hesitated for a moment, then nodded. He didn't fully understand the extent of Uma's new abilities, but he knew they couldn't afford to waste any advantage against the Vex. As they rushed towards the exit, Dennis caught a glimpse of their reflection in a polished surface. Uma's luminescent form contrasted sharply with his own, a vivid reminder of how much had changed in so short a time. They emerged from the medical facility into a world of chaos. Vex drones filled the sky, their metallic forms glinting in the light of Zalkari energy weapons. In the distance, larger Vex ships exchanged fire with the planet's orbital defenses. Uma raised her forearms, energy crackling between her fingertips. "Let's show them what we can do," she said, her voice filled with dedication. Without waiting for a response, she launched herself into the air, propelled by pure energy. Dennis watched in awe as she soared towards the nearest group of Vex drones, her body leaving a trail of light in her wake. As Uma engaged the enemy, Dennis activated his comm link, ready to coordinate their efforts with the rest of the defense force. The battle for the Zalkari homeworld had begun, and with Uma's newfound powers, the tide was about to turn. Dennis watched in awe as Uma engaged the Vex drones, her luminescent form weaving through the air with supernatural grace. Her forearms moved in perfect synchronization, unleashing bursts of energy that shattered the metallic invaders. Snapping out of his momentary trance, Dennis activated his comm link. "Kira, Jax, do you copy? We've got a new asset on the field." "We see her." Kira's voice crackled through the link. "What in the galaxy happened down there?" "Long story," Dennis replied, his eyes tracking Uma's movements. "For now, let's focus on repelling this attack." As Uma continued her aerial assault, Dennis noticed a group of Zalkari medical personnel rushing towards him, led by Chief Physician ZLRA. Her multifaceted eyes reflected a mix of concern and scientific curiosity. "We need to assess the extent of Uma's transformation," ZLRA said, her voice urgent. "The implications of this change are beyond our current understanding." Dennis nodded, keenly aware of the need to balance immediate defense with long-term comprehension. He raised his comm link again. "Uma, we need you back at the medical facility for some quick tests." Uma's response came as she obliterated another cluster of Vex drones. "On my way." Within moments, Uma landed gracefully beside them, her skin still pulsing with an otherworldly glow. ZLRA and her team immediately began conducting a series of rapid tests, their equipment humming as it analyzed Uma's altered physiology. "Extraordinary," ZLRA murmured, her eyes flicking between Uma and the data readouts. "Your enhanced arms possess strength capable of bending reinforced metal, yet retain the dexterity to manipulate objects on a microscopic scale." Uma flexed her forearms experimentally, marveling at the newfound power coursing through them. "It feels natural," she said, her voice carrying that same ethereal resonance. "Like I've always been this way." Before they could delve deeper into the implications of Uma's transformation, alarms blared throughout the facility. Ambassador Zorn's voice came through the comm system, his tone grave. "The Vex have breached our outer defenses," he announced. "They're deploying ground troops near key installations, including the medical facility." Dennis's mind raced, quickly assessing their options. "We need to secure the artifacts we recovered," he said, turning to Zorn. "If the Vex get their hands on them, dash." "Agreed," Zorn interrupted. "I've already ordered them moved to a secure vault within the medical facility. We'll need Uma's help to reinforce the defenses." Without hesitation, Uma nodded. "Lead the way." As they rushed towards the vault, Dennis coordinated with the facility security team, establishing a defensive perimeter. Uma's enhanced strength proved invaluable as they worked to reinforce the vault's physical barriers. While Uma and the security team prepared for the impending assault, Dennis huddled with a group of Zalkari scientists. They worked feverishly to create a protective energy field around the artifacts, drawing inspiration from the principles of Uma's transformation. The distant sound of explosions grew closer, signaling the approach of Vex ground forces. Dennis took a position near the facility's entrance, his weapon at the ready. Uma stood beside him, her forearms each gripping a different weapon. "Ready?" Dennis asked, glancing at his transformed companion. Uma's skin pulsed with a soft, patterned light. "More than ever," she replied, her voice steady. As the first wave of Vex troops came into view, Uma's bioluminescent skin flared to life. She projected a dizzying array of light patterns, momentarily disorienting the advancing robots. Dennis and the security team seized the opportunity, unleashing a barrage of fire that tore through the confused Vex forces. The battle for the medical facility intensified, with Uma at the forefront. Her forearms moved with incredible speed and precision, alternating between close-quarter combat and operating defensive systems. Dennis coordinated their efforts, his tactical experience allowing him to direct Uma and the security team to exploit weaknesses in the Vex attack patterns. In the heat of combat, Uma made a startling discovery. As she reached out to activate a nearby defense turret, she found she could interface directly with the system through her energy-infused arms. The turret's effectiveness doubled instantly, its targeting and fire rate dramatically improved. "Dennis," Uma called out, her voice carrying over the din of battle. "I can enhance our defensive systems." Understanding dawned on Dennis's face. He quickly adjusted their strategy, positioning Uma at key points to amplify their defenses. The tide of battle began to turn in their favor, the enhanced systems repelling wave after wave of Vex attackers. As they pushed back the main Vex assault, Dennis's comm link crackled to life. "Security breach in the lower levels," a panicked voice reported. "Vex infiltrators are heading for the vault." Dennis locked eyes with Uma, a silent understanding passing between them. "Let's move," he said, gesturing to a small team of security personnel. "We need to cut them off before they reach the artifacts." They raced through the facility's winding corridors, the sounds of combat echoing from multiple directions. As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a group of Vex infiltrators. Uma sprang into action, her forearms becoming a blur of motion. She engaged multiple enemies simultaneously, her enhanced agility allowing her to dodge incoming fire while striking back with devastating force. Dennis and the security team provided covering fire, their shots precisely aimed to take advantage of the openings Uma created. The close-quarters combat favored Uma's unique fighting style. Her multiple limbs allowed her to disarm traps, deflect attacks, and strike from unexpected angles. The Vex, despite their advanced technology, struggled to counter her unpredictable movements. As they fought their way closer to the vault, Dennis spotted a heavily armored Vex unit attempting to breach the reinforced doors. "Uma!" he shouted, pointing towards the immediate threat. Uma's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. In a flash of inspiration, she reached out with her energy-infused arms, interfacing directly with the vault's security systems. She created a feedback loop, channeling the Vex's own energy weapons against them. The effect was immediate and devastating. The Vex unit's systems overloaded, sparks flying as it collapsed in a heap of twisted metal. The remaining infiltrators, their coordinated attack now in disarray, fell quickly to the combined efforts of Uma, Dennis, and the security team. As the last Vex infiltrator fell, Dennis's comm link came to life once more. Kira's voice, tinged with a mix of relief and excitement, filled the air. "Dennis, do you copy? We've taken out the Vex command ship. Their forces are in disarray, but we've still got a significant number of ground troops to deal with." Dennis's mind raced, recognizing the opportunity before them. He glanced at Uma, then at the vault containing the ancient artifacts. A daring plan began to form in his mind. "Kira, hold your position," he replied. "I think we might have a way to end this once and for all." As Dennis began to outline his plan, Uma stood ready, her forearms pulsing with energy. The next few moments would determine not just the fate of the Zalkari homeworld, but potentially the course of the entire galactic conflict. As Dennis's plan took shape, Uma nodded in agreement, her luminescent skin pulsing with anticipation. "We'll use the artifacts and Uma's enhanced abilities to create a planet-wide energy disruption field," Dennis explained to the team. It should disable the Vex forces across the entire world. Ambassador Zorn's eyes widened. An ambitious plan, but it could work. We'll need to modify the energy amplification array in the medical facility. Without wasting a moment, they sprang into action. Uma took her position at the center of the hastily modified array, her 4 arms extended outward. Dennis initiated the activation sequence, his fingers dancing across the control panel. The ancient artifacts began to glow, their otherworldly energy flowing into Uma. Her skin brightened, patterns of light racing across her body as she channeled the power. Uma's arms moved in intricate patterns, directing the energy flow throughout the array. A low hum filled the air, growing in intensity as the energy built. Suddenly, a wave of blue-white light burst from the array, expanding rapidly outward. It engulfed the medical facility and continued to spread across the Zalkari homeworld. Dennis watched the tactical displays, his heart racing as the energy field swept across the planet. On the screens, he saw Vex ground forces stumbling and falling, their systems overloaded by the disruptive energy. "It's working." Kira's voice crackled through the comm. "The Vex units are dropping like flies out here." But as the planetary defense teams moved in to neutralize the disabled Vex, new problems arose. Uma's skin blazed with intense light, emitting pulses that interfered with nearby electronic systems. The medical facility's power grid fluctuated wildly, alarms blaring as vital equipment threatened to shut down. Chief Physician ZLRA rushed to a control panel, her multiple arms working furiously to stabilize the systems. "We're losing power to critical life support units," she called out. Dennis gritted his teeth, working to modulate the energy output from the artifacts. "Uma, can you control the intensity?" He shouted over the chaos. Uma's face was a mask of concentration, her 4 arms trembling with effort. "I'm trying," she gasped, her voice strained. "The power. It's overwhelming." As they struggled to maintain control, a new alert sounded. Ambassador Zorn's voice cut through the din. "Long-range sensors have detected a massive Vex mothership entering the system. It's unlike anything we've ever seen." Dennis's blood ran cold as he saw the readings. The mothership dwarfed their previous encounters, and worse, it seemed unaffected by the energy disruption field. Zorn's eyes darted between the data screens. The artifacts. They contain more than we realized. There's information about creating localized rifts in space-time, a defensive measure used by the ancients. A rift? Dennis's mind raced, weighing the risks. "We just closed one. Opening another could be catastrophic." "We may not have a choice," Zorn replied grimly. "Our planetary defenses are still recovering. We can't repel that mothership conventionally." Dennis looked at Uma, still straining to control the energy coursing through her. He made his decision. "Do it. Modify the array for rift creation." As the Zalkari scientists worked feverishly to reconfigure the array, the situation deteriorated further. The Vex mothership launched a barrage of energy projectiles towards the planet. Several breached the weakened defenses, impacting across the surface. A violent tremor shook the facility as a projectile struck nearby. The energy amplification array destabilized, its connection to Uma fluctuating dangerously. Dennis rushed to her side, attempting to disconnect her, but found the energy link too powerful to break. Uma's eyes snapped open, glowing with an inner light. "I can do it," she said, her voice resonating with newfound clarity. "I can control the rift." Before Dennis could respond, Uma took direct control of the process. Her 4 arms moved with impossible speed and precision, manipulating energy flows in ways that left even the Zalkari scientists in awe. Space itself seemed to warp and twist before them. A massive rift tore open in the path of the approaching Vex mothership, its energy signature pulsing in sync with Uma's enhanced physiology. The mothership, caught in the rift's pull, was drawn inexorably towards the tear in space-time. As it entered the rift, Uma's arms made one final, decisive movement. The rift collapsed behind the ship, trapping it in a pocket of disrupted space-time. With the mothership removed, the remaining Vex forces fell into disarray. The combined fleet pressed their advantage, mopping up the last pockets of resistance. Inside the facility, Uma's glow began to fade. Her extra arms started to lose their definition, slowly merging back into her body. Dennis and the medical team worked frantically to disconnect her from the array. As the last connection severed, Uma collapsed into Dennis's arms, her body a mix of Nigerian and enhanced features. The medical team swarmed around them, working to stabilize her fluctuating vital signs. Dennis held Uma close, his palms sweating from the events that had unfolded. The immediate threat had passed, but he knew the repercussions of their actions would echo across the galaxy. As Uma was rushed to intensive care, Dennis turned his attention to coordinating the planet's recovery efforts, all the while wondering what changes the future would bring for Uma, for their team, and for the delicate balance of power in the cosmos. Galaxy. As Uma was rushed to intensive care, Dennis found himself torn between his duty to coordinate the planet's recovery efforts and his deep concern for his transformed companion. In the days that followed, Dennis divided his time between overseeing the cleanup operations and sitting vigil at Uma's bedside. The medical facility buzzed with activity as teams worked tirelessly to treat the injured and repair damaged systems. Chief Physician Zelare led the medical team monitoring Uma's condition. Her multiple arms moved with practiced efficiency as she adjusted various instruments and analyzed the stream of data flowing across the screens. Her physiology is remarkable, Zelare murmured, her eyes scanning the readouts. The energy exposure has fundamentally altered her cellular structure. Dennis leaned forward, his brow furrowed with concern. Will she recover? Zelare's expression softened. She's stabilizing, but the changes appear to be permanent. Her body is adapting to its new state. As if on cue, Uma stirred. Her eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on Dennis's face. A weak smile tugged at her lips. "Hey!" she whispered, her voice hoarse. Dennis clasped her hand, relief washing over him. "Welcome back." Uma's gaze drifted to her arms. All four of them. So it wasn't a dream, she mused. Not a dream, Dennis confirmed. You saved us all. Over the next few weeks, Uma's recovery progressed steadily. Her enhanced strength and dexterity remained, though her once brilliant bioluminescence faded to a subtle glow. Dennis spent every free moment by her side, their bond deepening through shared moments of quiet conversation and companionable silence. As Uma regained her strength, the medical team began a series of tests to assess her new abilities. Under controlled conditions, she demonstrated an uncanny control over energy fields, manipulating them with her forearms in ways that left the scientists awestruck. Ambassador Zorn and a team of Zalkari researchers pored over the data collected during the Rift creation event. Their findings sent ripples of excitement through the scientific community. It's extraordinary, Zorn explained to Dennis and Uma. The combination of the artifact technology and Uma's unique physiology has created a stable quantum entanglement between her and the rift containing the Vex mothership. Uma's eyes widened. I can feel it, she said softly. Like a tether in the back of my mind. Dennis frowned. Is it dangerous? Zorn shook his head. Not inherently. In fact, it could be immensely valuable. Uma can sense the rift's status and potentially manipulate it from a distance. The strategic implications of this development were not lost on Commander Frost. Within days, plans were underway to establish a joint research facility dedicated to studying the rift and Uma's connection to it. The facility, a sprawling complex of laboratories and testing chambers, soon became a hub of interspecies collaboration. Human, Nigerian, and Zalkari scientists worked side by side, pushing the boundaries of their understanding of rift technology. Uma threw herself into the research, participating in carefully controlled experiments. Under the watchful eyes of the scientific team and Dennis, who insisted on being present, she learned to create small, localized rifts and manipulate energy fields with increasing precision. During one such session, Uma stood at the center of a circular array, her four arms extended. With a look of intense concentration, she wove her hands through the air in intricate patterns. The space before her shimmered and warped, a small rift blossoming into existence. Remarkable, breathed Dr. Lon, the lead human physicist. The energy readings are off the charts. Dennis watched from behind a protective barrier, a mix of awe and concern on his face. How does it feel, Uma? She turned to him, her eyes bright with excitement. It's exhilarating, like I'm touching the fabric of the universe itself. As the Allied forces made strides in understanding rift technology, a new threat loomed on the horizon. Long-range sensors detected unusual energy fluctuations near the trapped Vex mothership's location. They're trying to break free, Ambassador Zorn announced grimly during an emergency briefing. Our analysis suggests they're close to finding a way out of their space-time prison. The news sent a ripple of tension through the assembled leaders. High Emissary Zelna, her luminescent skin pulsing with urgency, stepped forward. We must act preemptively, she declared. I propose we create a network of smaller, controlled rifts around key strategic locations in Allied space. These rifts will serve as an early warning system and potentially allow for rapid response against future Vex incursions. All eyes turned to Uma, who sat quietly absorbing the implications of the plan. Dennis spoke up, his voice tinged with concern. The physical toll on Uma could be significant. We need to ensure her safety before proceeding. Chief Physician Zelare nodded in agreement. I'll conduct a thorough medical evaluation and develop appropriate safeguards. As preparations for the Rift network began, Ambassador Zorn made another startling discovery. Hidden within the encrypted data of the ancient artifacts was information about additional caches scattered across the galaxy. Each cache potentially contains technology as powerful as what we've already discovered, Zorn explained, his excitement palpable. The question is, do we seek them out or destroy them to prevent them from falling into enemy hands? The debate that followed was intense, but ultimately, the decision was made to launch a series of covert missions to locate and secure the artifact caches. Dennis, given his experience with the technology and his close relationship with Uma, was tasked with leading these operations. Uma, still in the final stages of her recovery, insisted on participating. My abilities are crucial to our success, she argued. I need to be there. As the first mission took shape, the research team achieved a breakthrough in stabilizing Uma's enhanced state. They developed a specialized suit that regulated the energy flowing through her body, allowing for safer and more efficient use of her abilities. The suit, a marvel of human, Nigerian, and Zalkari engineering, was a sleek, form-fitting design that accommodated Uma's four arms. As she donned it for the first time, the subtle glow of her skin harmonized with the suit's energy systems. With Uma's new equipment in place and the mission parameters set, Dennis assembled a diverse team of specialists from all three allied species. They underwent intensive training, learning to work as a cohesive unit and leveraging Uma's unique abilities in various combat and infiltration scenarios. As the team made their final preparations, alarms blared throughout the facility. Long-range sensors had detected a massive energy surge from the Vex-containing rift, followed by the appearance of several smaller rifts in nearby star systems. They're creating escape routes, Dennis realized, his heart racing. The Allied leadership, faced with this new development, accelerated their plans. Dennis and Uma's team were quickly dispatched to secure the nearest artifact cache, hoping to gain an advantage before the Vex could fully break free. As their ship prepared for departure, Uma stood on the bridge, her forearms interfacing with the rift monitoring systems. Her eyes closed in concentration as she tapped into the quantum entanglement linking her to the rift network. "I can sense their movements," she reported, her voice taut with focus. "They're gathering strength, preparing for a massive push." Dennis relayed the information to the Allied forces preparing for a potential large-scale invasion. As the ship's engines hummed to life, he turned to Uma. "Ready?" he asked, echoing their exchange from what felt like a lifetime ago. Uma met his gaze, her expression a mix of dedication and trepidation. "As I'll ever be," she replied. With a burst of energy, the ship entered hyperspace, bound for the coordinates of the first artifact cache. As stars streaked past the viewports, Dennis and Uma shared a moment of silent understanding. The fate of their mission, and potentially the entire galaxy, hung in the balance as they raced against time to secure the ancient technology before the Vex could regroup and launch their counterattack. Counteroffensive, as the ship accelerated into hyperspace, Dennis turned to Uma, his expression a mix of purpose and concern. "How are you holding up?" he asked, studying her face for signs of fatigue. Uma flexed her forearms, the specialized suit adapting seamlessly to her movements. "I'm ready," she replied, her voice steady. "This connection to the Rift network. It's intense, but I'm managing it." The ship's exit from hyperspace was abrupt, jolting the crew as they emerged into a sea of tumbling rocks and debris. Dennis's eyes widened as he took in the massive asteroid field stretching out before them. Sensors detecting unusual energy signatures from the asteroids, reported Kira, their Zalkari science officer. Her tentacles danced over the control panel, analyzing the incoming data. "These don't appear to be natural formations." Uma stepped forward, her forearms extending towards the ship's interface nodes. As she connected, her body began to glow faintly, the suit's energy regulators pulsing in rhythm with her enhanced physiology. "I can feel the energy patterns," she said, her eyes closing in concentration. "It's like a maze, but I think I can guide us through." Dennis nodded, trusting in Uma's abilities. "Take us in nice and slow." The ship glided forward, Uma's arms moving in complex patterns as she interfaced directly with the navigation systems. The vessel weaved between massive chunks of rock, some as large as small moons, others no bigger than a shuttlecraft. As they penetrated deeper into the field, the energy signatures grew stronger. Suddenly, a brilliant beam of light lanced out from the planet's surface, enveloping their ship in a shimmering field of energy. "Tractor beam!" shouted Kira, her tentacles flailing in alarm. Dennis gripped the command chair, his squeezing hard. "Uma, can you break us free?" Uma's face contorted with effort, her forearms working furiously across multiple control panels. "Negative," she grunted. "The energy signature. It's unlike anything I've encountered. I can't disrupt it." The ship was pulled inexorably towards the planet's surface. As they descended through the atmosphere, a massive hangar bay built into the side of a mountain came into view. The tractor beam guided them inside, setting the ship down with surprising gentleness. As the engines powered down, Dennis addressed the team. "Stay alert. We don't know what we're dealing with here." The cargo bay doors opened with a hiss, revealing a group of alien beings unlike any they had encountered before. Tall and slender, with iridescent skin and multiple sets of eyes, they regarded the team with an air of quiet assessment. One of the aliens stepped forward, its voice resonating with a strange, multi-tone quality. "We are the Croft, guardians of the ancient legacy. You've been brought here to be tested." Dennis exchanged a glance with Uma before addressing the alien. "We come in peace, seeking knowledge to defend our galaxy against a great threat." The Croft nodded solemnly. "We know of the Vex and of the greater dangers that lurk beyond. If you are truly worthy, you may claim the legacy of our ancestors. But first, you must prove yourselves." Over the next several hours, Dennis, Uma, and their team were subjected to a series of grueling trials. Physical challenges tested their strength and agility, while mental puzzles pushed their problem-solving abilities to the limit. Throughout the trials, Uma's enhanced abilities proved invaluable. Her forearms allowed her to navigate complex physical obstacles with ease, while her connection to the energy fields gave her unique insights into the more esoteric challenges. Dennis, for his part, demonstrated his leadership skills and strategic thinking. He coordinated the team's efforts, making sure each member's strengths were utilized to their fullest potential. As they completed the final trial, the croft led them to a vast chamber deep within the mountain. At its center stood a device similar to the artifact that had originally transformed Uma. The final test, intoned the croft leader. Connect with the artifact and unlock its secrets. Uma stepped forward, her suit adapting to the rising energy levels in the room. As she placed her hands on the artifact, her body began to glow intensely. Her forearms moved in intricate patterns, channeling immense energies that swirled around her in vibrant colors. Dennis and the team watched in awe as a massive holographic display materialized above them, showing a map of the galaxy with pulsing points of light indicating the locations of other artifact caches. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the facility. A rift had opened near the artifact, a swirling vortex of energy that pulsed with an ominous red light. Before anyone could react, a group of Vex soldiers poured through the opening. "Protect the artifact," Dennis shouted, drawing his weapon as chaos erupted in the chamber. Uma disengaged from the artifact, her body still glowing with residual energy. She raised her forearms, creating shimmering barriers of force to deflect the Vex energy weapons. The croft revealed their own advanced weaponry, joining the fray with surprising skill. Beams of coherent light lanced out, cutting through the Vex metallic bodies with ease. As the battle raged, Dennis noticed a change in Uma's movements. Her combat style had evolved, becoming more fluid and powerful. Her forearms worked in perfect harmony, alternating between manipulating energy fields and engaging in hand-to-hand combat with the Vex. The specialized suit adapted to her movements, enhancing her natural abilities and protecting her from the intense energy feedback. Uma danced through the battlefield, a whirlwind of glowing limbs and crackling energy. As the last of the Vex forces fell, Uma's eyes blazed with power. She raised her arms, fingers weaving complex patterns in the air. The rift that had allowed the Vex entry began to warp and twist. "Uma, what are you doing?" Dennis called out, concern evident in his voice. "Sending them back," she replied through gritted teeth. With a final, decisive gesture, Uma collapsed the rift, sucking the remaining Vex forces back into their prison dimension. The effort left her gasping for breath, but the immediate threat had been neutralized. The croft leader approached Dennis and Uma, its multiple eyes blinking in what seemed to be approval. "You have proven yourselves worthy," it declared. "The legacy of our ancestors is now yours to bear." As the team prepared to depart with their newfound knowledge and artifacts, the croft offered an unexpected boon. "We will join your fight," the leader said. "A contingent of our warriors and scientists will accompany you, to aid in the battles to come." Dennis nodded gratefully, recognizing the value of these new allies. As they boarded their ship, now laden with ancient technology and joined by their croft companions, he turned to Uma. "Ready for the next cache?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Uma flexed her forearms, the glow of her skin pulsing with renewed energy. "Let's go safeguard the galaxy," she replied, her eyes fixed on the stars beyond. As the ship's engines roared to life, Uma connected once more to the Rift network, sending a coded message back to Allied space. The message spoke of their success, but also hinted at the new threats they had uncovered, threats that could reshape the very nature of their conflict. With a burst of energy, the ship leapt into hyperspace, leaving the croft facility behind. As the stars streaked past the viewports, Dennis and Uma began to plan their next move in the race against time, aware that each artifact cache they secured could tip the balance in the war against the Vex, and perhaps against even greater dangers lurking in the depths of space. The cosmos itself. The calm of hyperspace was shattered by an urgent transmission from Commander Frost. Dennis's brow furrowed as he absorbed the news. A Vex scout ship had breached containment, escalating the urgency of their mission. "Change of plans," Dennis announced, his fingers flying over the navigation console. "We're diverting to the nearest artifact cache. Uma, can you get a read on it?" Uma nodded, her forearms interfacing with the ship's systems. Her eyes glowed faintly as she processed the data. Coordinates locked. It's a jungle planet, heavy electromagnetic activity. As they approached the planet, the ship bucked violently. Electric blue lightning arced across the viewports, and alarms blared throughout the bridge. "Atmospheric entry is going to be rough," Dennis warned, gripping the controls. Uma stepped forward, her forearms spreading wide. She closed her eyes, connecting deeply with the ship's systems. As energy coursed through her body, the specialized suit pulsed with light. The ship's erratic movements gradually stabilized, cutting smoothly through the turbulent atmosphere. They touched down in a small clearing, the dense jungle pressing in around them. Dennis assembled a ground team, himself, Uma, 2 Croft warriors, and Eel-9, a Zalkari scientist whose tentacles twitched with anticipation. As they stepped off the ship, the humid air hit them like a wall. Strange, multi-hued plants towered overhead, their leaves as wide as a man. The ground squelched beneath their feet, and the air buzzed with unseen insects. "Stay alert," Dennis cautioned, his hand resting on his weapon. "This place feels alive." They hadn't gone far when a vine-like tendril whipped out, wrapping around Eel-9's leg. The Zalkari let out a gurgling cry as it was yanked off its feet. Uma reacted instantly, 2 of her arms slicing through the air to sever the tendril, while her other 2 hauled Eel-9 to safety. "Carnivorous flora," Eel-9 gasped, its tentacles quivering. "Fascinating." As they pressed on, the jungle seemed to close in around them. Phosphorescent fungi cast an eerie glow, and the air grew thick with spores. Uma's enhanced senses picked up movement all around them, some large, some small, all potentially deadly. A swarm of iridescent insects suddenly descended upon them, their stingers gleaming wickedly. The team scattered, swatting frantically at the air. Uma's 4 arms became a blur as she created a force field, the insects bouncing harmlessly off the shimmering energy. "This way," Dennis called, spotting a break in the undergrowth. They sprinted forward, emerging into a clearing dominated by an enormous, gnarled tree. Its trunk was easily 100 meters across, its bark twisted into unnatural patterns. "The temple," one of the Croft warriors breathed, pointing to an opening at the base of the tree. As they approached, the ground beneath their feet suddenly gave way. Dennis leapt back, narrowly avoiding a spiked pit. Uma's reflexes allowed her to snatch Eel-9 mid-fall, her forearms easily supporting the Zalkari's weight. "Traps," Dennis muttered, his eyes scanning the area. "Everyone watch your step." They picked their way carefully towards the entrance, disarming pressure plates and sidestepping hidden triggers. Uma's enhanced agility proved invaluable as she led the way, her multiple limbs allowing her to test the ground ahead while maintaining her balance. Just as they reached the entrance, a whisper of movement caught Dennis's attention. "Uma, luki ouch." A dart shot from a hidden recess, aimed straight at Uma's chest. She twisted, faster than seemed possible, but not quite fast enough. The dart grazed Eel-9, who had been sheltering behind her. The Zalkari scientist collapsed, its skin rapidly turning a sickly shade of green. Uma knelt beside it, her suit's medical systems whirring to life. A soft blue glow emanated from her hands as she worked to neutralize the poison. The artifact cache is our priority, Dennis said, torn between the mission and his injured team member. Uma, can you stabilize EL9? Uma nodded, her face set in concentration. Go. We'll catch up. Dennis and the Croft warriors pressed on into the temple. The interior was a maze of twisting corridors and cavernous chambers, the walls covered in strange, shifting symbols. As they navigated the labyrinth, Dennis's calm unit crackled to life. Dennis. Uma's voice came through, tense with urgency. I'm picking up an energy signature. Vex ship inbound. Dennis cursed under his breath. How long? Minutes at most. He made a split-second decision. Uma, get EL9 back to the ship. Prepare for immediate departure. We'll secure the artifacts and meet you there. The central chamber loomed before them, a vast space filled with pulsing, otherworldly technology. As Dennis and the Croft warriors worked to disconnect and secure the artifacts, a tremor ran through the temple. They're here, one of the Croft warriors hissed. Dennis's hands moved faster, carefully extracting what appeared to be a key component, a device humming with potential energy. As he placed it in his pack, the sound of weapons fire echoed from outside. Time to go, he ordered, leading the way back through the twisting corridors. They emerged into chaos. Vex forces had surrounded the temple entrance, their metallic bodies gleaming in the strange light of the jungle. Dennis and the Croft warriors took cover, returning fire as they looked for an escape route. Suddenly, the air before them began to shimmer and distort. A small, localized rift flickered into existence, its edges unstable but holding. Uma, Dennis breathed, recognizing her handiwork. He signaled to the Croft warriors, and they made a break for the rift. Energy blasts from Vex weapons sizzled past them as they dove through the portal, emerging near their ship. Uma stood at the base of the ship's ramp, her body glowing intensely, all four arms outstretched as she maintained the rift. The effort was clearly taking its toll. Her specialized suit sparked and smoked, and her face was contorted in pain. Go, go! Dennis shouted, providing covering fire as the Croft warriors raced up the ramp. As the last of the team made it aboard, Uma released her hold on the rift. It collapsed with a thunderous crack, and she stumbled, her legs giving out beneath her. Dennis caught her, lifting her easily as he carried her into the ship. The engines roared to life as they took off, narrowly avoiding the Vex vessel that had entered the planet's atmosphere. As they broke orbit, Dennis gently laid Uma down, his hands hovering uncertainly over her damaged suit. Una, he said softly, worry etching lines in his face. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and distant. Did we get it? Dennis nodded, squeezing her hand. We did, thanks to you. As the ship entered hyperspace, Dennis turned his attention to the artifacts they'd recovered. The key component they'd found pulsed with latent energy, its purpose still a mystery, but its potential clear. It could be the key to ending the Vex threat once and for all, or it could open the door to even greater dangers. A incoming transmission alert flashed on the console. Commander Frost's face appeared, grim and weary. Dennis, the situation has escalated. The Vex have launched a full-scale assault across multiple systems. We need those artifacts, and we need them now. Dennis looked from the artifacts to Uma's unconscious form, then to EL9, still recovering from the poison. The weight of command settled heavily on his shoulders as he contemplated their next move. The fate of entire civilizations hung in the balance, and the decisions he made in the next few moments could tip the scales of the war. With a deep breath, Dennis straightened, his mind racing through possibilities as the ship hurtled through hyperspace, carrying its precious cargo towards an uncertain future. Future. Dennis's reply to Commander Frost was cut short as alarms blared throughout the ship. The navigation console flashed red, indicating an imminent collision. Dennis lunged for the controls, narrowly avoiding a massive Nigerian medical frigate that had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Unidentified vessel, This is Captain Thorne of the Nigean medical frigate Asclepius. We've intercepted your distress signal. Prepare for emergency docking." Dennis exhaled sharply, relief washing over him. "Copy that, Asclepius. We have injured crew members in need of immediate medical attention." The docking procedure was swift and precise. As the airlock hissed open, a team of Nigean medical specialists rushed aboard, led by a tall, lithe figure with iridescent skin and large, empathetic eyes. "I'm Dr. Lyra," she introduced herself, her gaze already assessing the situation. "Where are the injured?" Dennis led her to Uma's unconscious form. Dr. Lyra's eyes widened as she took in the damaged suit and Uma's altered physiology. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, scanning and probing. "Fascinating," she murmured. "Her energy levels are highly unstable. We need to move her to our medical bay immediately." As the medical team carefully transferred Uma to a hover stretcher, Dennis turned to the Croft warriors. "Stay with the ship and guard the artifacts. I'm going with Uma." The Asclepius's medical bay was a marvel of technology, filled with equipment Dennis had never seen before. Uma was placed in a chamber that pulsed with soft, blue light. Dr. Lyra's fingers danced across holographic displays, adjusting parameters with lightning speed. "Her cellular structure is unlike anything I've ever seen," Dr. Lyra explained, her voice a mix of concern and fascination. "The energy manipulation has triggered significant changes at a genetic level." Dennis watched, his stomach knotting with worry. "Can you help her?" Dr. Lyra nodded, her expression determined. "We can stabilize her, but these changes, they may be permanent." As the treatment began, a tall, broad-shouldered Nigean entered the medical bay. His uniform marked him as the ship's captain. "Captain Thorne," he introduced himself, extending a hand to Dennis. "We need to talk." They moved to a nearby conference room, where Dennis quickly brought the captain up to speed on their mission and the artifacts they'd recovered. Thorne's expression grew increasingly grim as Dennis spoke. "The situation is worse than you know," Thorne said, activating a holographic display. It showed a map of Allied space, large swaths of it blinking red. "The Vex have launched a full-scale assault. We've lost contact with multiple systems, and refugees are pouring into fortified worlds." Dennis's mind raced. "We need to get this artifact data to our research teams immediately." Thorne nodded, gesturing to a secure communication array. "Use our systems. They're more powerful and better protected than what you have on your ship." As Dennis transmitted the data, emphasizing the importance of the rift-stabilizing component, Dr. Lyra entered the room. Her expression was a mix of excitement and concern. "Uma's condition has evolved," she said, leading them back to the medical bay. Uma lay in the treatment chamber, her skin now emitting a subtle, pulsing glow. Her forearms moved with increased fluidity, even in her unconscious state. "Her body is adapting to the energy fluctuations," Dr. Lyra explained, integrating them into her physiology. "It's as if she's undergone an accelerated evolution." Dennis leaned closer, studying Uma's changed form. "What does this mean for her?" "Increased strength, enhanced dexterity, possibly even greater control over her energy manipulation abilities," Dr. Lyra said. "But it also means increased risk. Without proper control, she could be a danger to herself and others." As if on cue, Uma's eyes fluttered open. She took in her surroundings with a mix of confusion and alertness. "Dennis, what happened?" Before Dennis could respond, the ship rocked violently. Alarms blared, and Captain Thorne's comm unit crackled to life. "Sir, we've got incoming. Multiple Vex ships just dropped out of hyperspace." Thorne turned to Dennis, his expression grave. "We're out of time. Whatever you're planning to do with those artifacts, it needs to happen now." Dennis looked at Uma, who was already sitting up, flexing her arms experimentally. Her eyes met his, filled with perseverance. "I'm ready," she said, her voice stronger than he expected. "Whatever it takes to stop the Vex." As if in response to her words, Dennis's comm unit lit up with an urgent message from the Allied research team. They'd made a breakthrough with the artifact data, a way to create a network of stable rift for rapid force deployment. But it required someone with Uma's unique abilities to serve as a focal point. Dennis quickly explained the situation to Uma, Captain Thorne, and Dr. Lyra. Uma didn't hesitate. "I'll do it," she said, standing up. Her new suit, hastily constructed by the Nigerian medical team, hummed with energy. "But we need to move fast." Captain Thorne nodded, already moving towards a bridge. "I know a secure facility where we can set this up, but we'll have to fight our way through the Vex fleet to get there." As they rushed to prepare, Dennis caught Uma's arm. For a moment, they stood in silence, the weight of what was to come hanging between them. "Are you sure about this?" Dennis asked softly. Uma's response was to take his hand in two of hers, her other two arms activating holographic displays around them. "Together," she said simply. The Asclepius shuddered as it engaged its engines, preparing to run the Vex blockade. Dennis and Uma made their way to the bridge, where Captain Thorne was barking orders to his crew. Through the view screen, they could see the looming shapes of Vex warships, their weapons already charging. "Battle stations," Thorne called out, "and may the stars have mercy on us all." As the Asclepius surged forward, Uma closed her eyes, reaching out with her newfound abilities. The ship's hull began to glow faintly, a shimmering field of energy forming around it. The first Vex shots glanced off this impromptu shield, buying them precious seconds as they hurtled towards their destination and an uncertain future. The Asclepius rocketed through space, its engines straining as it wove between Vex warships. Uma's energy field flickered and pulsed, deflecting enemy fire as Captain Thorne expertly piloted the medical frigate through the chaos. "We're approaching the research facility," Thorne called out, his hands dancing across the control panel. "Prepare for emergency docking procedures." As they neared their destination, Dennis's comm unit crackled with an urgent message from Commander Frost. "Dennis, the Vex fleet is converging on your position. You need to evacuate the facility immediately." Dennis locked eyes with Uma, who nodded in silent understanding. They had discussed this possibility, and now it was time to put their plan into action. The moment the Asclepius docked with the research facility, Dennis sprang into action. "Initiate evacuation protocols," he shouted, his voice carrying through the ship's intercom system. "All personnel, prepare for immediate teleportation." As the facility staff rushed to gather critical data and equipment, Uma made her way to the central chamber. The artifacts they had recovered from the temple were already integrated into a makeshift rift generator, pulsing with otherworldly energy. Uma took her position at the center of the device, her forearms spread wide. Dennis stood beside her, monitoring the energy levels as Dr. Lyra made final adjustments to Uma's suit. "Are you sure about this?" Dennis asked, concern etched on his face. Uma's eyes met his, filled with perseverance. "We don't have a choice. It's now or never." Outside, the first Vex ships entered the system, their weapons charging. Dennis took a deep breath and gave the order. "Activate mass teleportation." Uma's body tensed as she channeled an immense surge of energy. Her skin began to glow, the light growing brighter with each passing second. The air around them crackled with electricity, and reality itself seemed to bend and warp. Dennis watched in awe as Uma's forearms moved in perfect synchronization, weaving complex patterns in the air. The rift generator hummed louder, its components vibrating with hardly restrained power. Suddenly, a blinding flash of light engulfed everything. Dennis felt a moment of weightlessness, followed by a sickening lurch as space itself twisted around them. When his vision cleared, he found himself standing in an unfamiliar room, surrounded by disoriented staff members and blinking equipment. They had done it. The entire facility and its personnel had been transported to an uncharted region of space, safely hidden from the Vex. But the victory was short-lived. Uma collapsed to the floor, her body convulsing as erratic pulses of energy coursed through her. The strain of moving such a massive amount of matter through the Rift network had taken a devastating toll. Uma! Dennis cried out, rushing to her side. He cradled her in his arms, feeling the heat radiating from her skin. Her energy signature was fluctuating wildly, threatening to destabilize completely. Dr. Lyra and her medical team swarmed around them, their instruments beeping urgently. "Her energy levels are critical," Dr. Lyra reported, her voice tense. "We need to stabilize her immediately, or we'll lose her." Dennis's mind raced, searching for a solution. In a moment of clarity, he made a decision that would change everything. "I'm going to interface with her suit," he announced. "I can use my own life force to supplement hers." Before anyone could protest, Dennis activated the neural link in his own suit. He felt a jolt as his consciousness merged with Uma's failing systems. Suddenly, he was adrift in a sea of pure energy, experiencing the universe as Uma did. He saw the intricate web of cosmic forces that connected all things, felt the ebb and flow of energy that permeated every atom of existence. It was beautiful and terrifying, overwhelming in its complexity. Focusing his will, Dennis directed his own life energy into Uma's faltering systems. He felt a deep connection forming between them, transcending physical boundaries. Their minds intertwined, sharing thoughts, memories, and sensations. As Uma's energy signature stabilized, her eyes fluttered open. She gasped, her gaze locking with Dennis's. In that moment, they both realized that something fundamental had changed. Their bond had deepened beyond anything they could have imagined, creating a shared consciousness that bridged the gap between human and Nigean physiology. Uma sat up slowly, her forearms moving with newfound grace. "Dennis," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder. "I can feel everything." He nodded, understanding completely. "So can I. It's like we're seeing the universe for the first time." As they helped Uma to her feet, alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Captain Thorne's voice came over the intercom, urgent and tense. "We've got incoming. Vex ships have tracked our energy signature." Dennis and Uma exchanged a look, their shared consciousness allowing them to communicate without words. They both knew what needed to be done. "We can create a new type of rift," Uma said, her voice gaining strength. "One that exists in the fabric of reality itself." Dennis nodded, already understanding the concept. "We can use it to target the Vex hive mind, disrupt their ability to coordinate." As the facility's defense systems engaged, Dennis and Uma made their way to the command center. Staff members stepped aside, awed by the soft glow emanating from their bodies and the purposeful synchronization of their movements. They reached the central console, and Uma's forearms began to dance across the controls. Dennis placed his hands on her shoulders, their combined energy flowing into the system. The view screen lit up with a complex web of energy signatures, representing the Vex fleet's movements across the galaxy. "Ready?" Dennis asked, though he already knew the answer. Uma nodded, a smile playing at the corners of her mouth. "Let's end this." Together, they reached out with their newfound abilities, preparing to create a rift that would change the course of the war. As the first Vex ships appeared on the long-range scanners, Dennis and Uma stood united, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.